Hello friends, welcome to our channel. Today we're going to take a look at another horrible case with you. The case of Samia Shahid. Chaudhry Muhammad Shahid and Mityaz Shahid left their small village of Pandori in the Jhelum district of Punjab, Pakistan, in the mid-1980s to escape poverty and seek a better life. They immigrated to the UK, and in November 1987, their first child, Samia, was born in Bradford, West Yorkshire. A few years later, they welcomed their second child, a daughter named Mada. Shahid started a car rental business, which eventually grew to specialize in luxury vehicles, including limousines. As the business prospered, he helped two of his brothers and their families relocate from Pakistan to the UK. The Shahid family was well known and successful in Bradford, recognized for their wealth and influence. Shahid's brothers started and grew their businesses successfully. By the early 2000s, one brother owned a seafood shop chain, while the other ran a flower delivery and floristry business. Sisters Samia and Mada were born and raised in England, growing up in an interference of European and Pakistani cultures. However, their family strictly adheres to the traditions and laws of their homeland Pakistan. This created a sharp contrast between the liberal English lifestyle and the rigid rules imposed by their family. For instance, the girls were not permitted to drive, and their father closely monitored all their activities and interactions. The eldest daughter, Samia, was Shahid's pride and is considered Daddy's favorite daughter. He pampered her, buying her expensive clothes, jewelry, and let her study at the most prestigious university. She took great care of her appearance, using high-end cosmetics, go to beauty salons, and spend a lot of money there. Although she worked part-time at a post office, her lifestyle was primarily funded by her father, who fulfilled all her wishes. Secretly, Samia would sometimes rent a car and drive herself, as she loved driving and felt confident behind the wheel. She couldn't understand why Pakistani traditions restricted women from driving. Independent and strong-willed, she valued her freedom, but still made an effort to follow her parents' wishes and avoid upsetting them. Samia had many friends from university in England and stayed in touch with them. She was known for being bright, kind, and cheerful. Despite leading a life full of love and abundance, and seemingly having everything she could want, but she lacked the freedom to make her own decisions. She always acts according to the opinions of her parents and elder members of the family. Above all, she feared disappointing her father, whom she deeply admired. Yet, the strict rules, fears, and prohibitions in her life meant she could never truly be honest with her family. In 2012, Samia's parents decided it was time for she to marry, start a family, and have children. They insisted she travel to Pakistan to enter into a marriage that followed their cultural traditions. They chose her cousin, Shakil, as their son-in-law, a man she barely knew. Marriages between relatives and arranged unions are common in their culture. Samia had always known her parents would eventually select a husband for her, presenting it as a decision she could not refuse. She had resigned herself to this inevitability, but her father's choice left her deeply shocked. Samia found Shakil repulsive and could not imagine marrying him. To make matters worse, he had recently been released from prison after serving time for killing someone in a land dispute. Although Samia had interacted with him occasionally during childhood and had seen him as a brother figure, the idea of him as her husband was unthinkable. Her parents, who were also cousins in an arranged marriage, had fallen in love and built a happy life together. They believed the same would happen for Samia and Shakil, assuming love would grow over time. Despite her strong aversion to the match, Samia felt she couldn't defy her father and understood how much this marriage meant to her family. Her mother and younger sister Mata later asserted that no one forced her into the marriage. They thought that with her stubborn personality, they could not force her either physically or emotionally. According to them, she married willingly and of her own choice. In early February 2012, The decision about her upcoming wedding was finalized during a family meeting. In the weeks that followed, her parents, along with her aunt and uncle, who were also her future in-laws, took her shopping. She was able to choose anything she wanted: costly outfits, jewelry, accessories, cosmetics, and more, and they covered all the expenses. Outwardly, she feigned excitement of wedding preparations, but inwardly, she felt trapped. She already knew this marriage would not bring her happiness, but would instead feel like a punishment. Her true feelings could only be shared with her friends, not her family. At home, she had to maintain the appearance of joy, actively in discussing the wedding details, and prepare herself for her relocation to Pakistan. On February 20, 2012, Samia boarded a plane. She texted a close friend, telling her that she was about to fly thousands of miles to make the biggest mistake of her life, but she had no other choice. Later, she sent more messages, admitting that the very sight of the groom made her feel sick and that being near him was unbearable. On February 27th, Samia and Shakil had a grand wedding at Pandori, attended by around 1,000 guests. The wedding lasted 4 days, and as a wedding gift, Samia's parents gave she and Shakil a luxurious 2-story house located. However, Samia quickly realized that this beautiful house would feel like a prison, where she would be forced to live with a man she did not love. After returning to the United Kingdom, married life brought Samia no happiness. She still despised her husband, Shakil, and knew she could never love him. 4 months later, in mid-June 2012, she went back to her hometown of Bradford to handle some matters and assist Shakil with his immigration paperwork to apply for British citizenship. She planned to apply for a spousal visa for Shakil, but she postponed it to enjoy the feeling of freedom and have some time away from a husband she did not love. When Samia began processing the documents, she discovered that their wedding ceremony, conducted in full accordance with Sharia law, was only considered a marriage contract between Muslims and held no legal validity in the United Kingdom. To make the marriage legally recognized, it was necessary to follow European legal procedures, such as having a civil ceremony and obtaining an official marriage certificate. After returning from Pakistan, Samia's friends noticed significant changes in her personality and behavior. She seemed sad, her eyes were dull, and she was no longer the cheerful, sociable person they knew. It was clear she felt deep resentment toward her parents. Any discussion about her husband or married life made her uncomfortable and angry. The root of the problem was Shakil's extreme jealousy. Even from another country, he tormented Samia by constantly calling her and demanding video chats at any time. This allowed him to monitor her whereabouts, activities, and the people she was with. His behavior was not only a way to control her, but also a demonstration of his dominance and authority over her. In early August of that year, during a phone call with a close friend, Samia admitted that she was at her breaking point. She felt completely drained, had lost all joy and hope for happiness or a bright future, and no longer wanted to live. She expressed deep hatred for Shakil, saying she never wanted to see him again. However, she couldn't share these feelings with her family because they were busy bragging to everyone about the lavish wedding they had prepared for her. In early September, unable to resolve issues related to the marriage visa, Samia was forced to return to Pakistan to live with the husband she disliked, Shakil. She wrote frequently to friends, describing her misery, her distaste for her marriage, and her feeling of being trapped with no way out. This lasted for a few months, but then she started complaining less, and her mood gradually changed. During her next visit to the United Kingdom, the reason for this change became clear. Samia had met a young man online named Syed Mukhtar Kazim, a British citizen of Pakistani descent like herself. Syed was born and raised in London, but had been living and working in the United Arab Emirates for several years. The two began corresponding and quickly developed feelings for each other. They secretly meet, and in October 2013, they saw each other in person for the first time. Samia immediately realized that Syed was the man she wanted to spend her life with. He was kind, caring, attentive, and treated her with love and respect. They have many interests in common, but also understand the dangers in their relationship. Despite this, they felt that life only had meaning when they were together. Samia shared her situation with her beloved Syed and expressed her willingness to end her marriage to start a new life with him. However, she could not get a divorce in a British court because under local law, she was not recognized as married. In the spring of 2014, Samia decided to confront Shakil and asked him for a divorce. He refused rudely, declaring that she would remain his until the end of her life. During another visit to the United Kingdom to see her parents, Samia secretly reached out to a local Islamic Sharia council, explaining that she had been forced into the marriage, which was grounds for annulment. She also converted from Sunni Islam to Shiite Islam, the religion Syed now practices. When the cleric from the council contacted Shakil to hear his perspective on their marriage, he once again refused to cooperate, angrily declaring that he would not consent to a divorce. Afterward, the Islamic Sharia Council of the United Kingdom annulled Samia's marriage, acknowledging that she had been forced into it due to family pressure. Her family was unaware that she had divorced Shakil and was planning to remarry, this time to the man she truly loved, Syed. In September 2014, Samia secretly married Syed. Unlike the previous marriage, this marriage was legally recognized, and they also received a marriage certificate to confirm its legality. The cleric who approved the annulment of her first marriage was also the one who presided over the nikah ceremony. Only a few close friends attended the intimate wedding. Samia and Syed was overjoyed. Samia confided in her friends that she felt like a princess in a fairy tale and could hardly believe her happiness was real. Sadly, this happy moment turned out to be the beginning of a nightmare and eventually led to exile. When her ex-husband, Shakil, demanded that she return to Pakistan, she informed him that she was no longer his wife and presented her new marriage certificate. Enraged, Shakil immediately contacted Samia's father, igniting a major family scandal. Her family tried to pressure her into returning to he, even resorting to threats, but she refused. This thing led to dire consequences. A few weeks later, while shopping with her younger sister, Samia was brutally attacked on the street. Her sister was left unharmed, but she was severely beaten with metal bars and narrowly avoided having her legs broken. Although police took her statement, but the identity of the attackers remained unknown, and the case was soon closed. At this time, Syed had to travel to Dubai for work, leaving his wife, Samia, in the United Kingdom, where she was waiting for a visa to join him. The waiting period was agonizing for her, filled with threats, conflicts with her relatives, and fears for her safety. Her parents tried to prove that her divorce from Shakil was valid and even confronted the cleric who had officiated her marriage to Syed. Samia's mother was especially enraged, hurling insults at her daughter, accusing her of disgracing the family, and warning that she would face severe consequences. In the spring of 2015, Samia finally received her visa and was able to join Syed in Dubai. For her, it felt like an escape, as she feared her family would do everything in their power to prevent her from leaving and force her to return to Pakistan. To protect herself, she entrusted her passport to friends, who also purchased her plane ticket and accompanied her to the airport to ensure her safe departure. A new chapter of Samia's life began. The following year was the happiest of her life. She lives with Syed, the man she loves, who always cherishes and treats her with care. For the first time, she could drive a car, something her parents and former husband Shakil would never have allowed. In photos she shared on social media, she appeared radiant, confident, and more beautiful than ever. It was clear she was living the life she had always dreamed of. She hoped to become a mother soon, but unfortunately, that dream was not realized. Despite this, she and Syed remained optimistic about the future. planning their life together, unaware that her family had decided against her. Shortly after Samia left, her parents filed a missing persons report with the police, which they later attempted to reclassify as an abduction, accusing Syed of kidnapping her. Meanwhile, Shakil's family began plotting ways to force she to return. They realized that threatening her was no longer effective, but they still believed they could exploit her emotions and compassion to manipulate her. In June 2016, Samia received devastating news. Her aunt, Shakil's mother, had passed away. Heartbroken, Samia considered traveling to Pakistan for the funeral, but knew it could be dangerous. Many relatives still resent her for divorcing Shakil and remarrying Syed. Her actions were seen as treacherous and shameful. A week after the funeral, her mother called again with more distressing news. Her father's health had sharply declined. He was diabetic, and his condition had become critical. Samia feared that if he passed away, she could never forgive herself for not visiting him. Despite her own worries and Syed's dissuasion, she decides to go to Pakistan. Concerned for her safety, she promised her husband to stay in regular contact. On July 14, 2016, Samia arrived in Pakistan and stayed at a close friend's house. She left her passport and return ticket to Dubai with her friend, expressing her fear and insecurity and asking her friend to pray for her safe return to Syed. The first few days were relatively calm. She kept Syed and friend informed about her activities. She visited her aunt's grave with family and met several relatives. Her return flight to Dubai was scheduled for July 21. However, on July 20, Samia abruptly stopped all communication. On July 20th, 2016, a heartbreaking incident occurred when Shahid contacted the police to report the death of his daughter, Samia. Upon arriving at the house where Samia had lived with Shakil, police found her lifeless body at the bottom of the stairs. Sadly, it was too late to save her. They found bruises on her body, which her parents attributed to her falling down the stairs. A small amount of pink foam was flowing from her mouth. Shahid speculated that she might have had a heart condition, causing her to fall and tumble down the stairs. Since no one was home at the time, she did not receive immediate help and passed away. When questioned about Shakil, Shahid explained that he was away on business. The police found no evidence of foul play at the scene and opted not to open a criminal investigation. An autopsy conducted the same day revealed no signs of violence, concluding that her death was due to natural causes. Samia was buried just a few hours after her death. Her sudden departure was not considered suspicious and was not investigated by the authorities, but it had a devastating impact on Syed. When Syed learned of his wife's, Samia's, sudden death from a heart attack, he was in shock and disbelief. According to media reports, she chose to end her life due to depression because she could not have children. However, her family rejected this version. They claimed that she passed out, then fell down the stairs and broke her neck. The investigation revealed bitter truths. Syed quickly flew to Pakistan on the earliest available flight and went directly to the police station, alleging that Samia had been killed by her relatives and Shakil. He detailed the forced marriage she had endured, her subsequent escape, and the threats she had received from her family. This testimony completely changed the development of the case, forcing the authorities to determine this was a criminal act. However, by this time, Samia had already been buried, and the official report still stated she had died of natural causes. Determined to seek justice, Syed turned to European law enforcement and the media, as Samia was a British citizen, to push for further investigation. Samia's father, Shahid, initially agreed to an interview, attempting to depict Syed as a fraud and extortionist. However, when Syed presented their marriage certificate, a medical report, and post-mortem photos of Samia, authorities launched an investigation. The report revealed bruises on Samia's neck and legs, along with traces of male seminal fluid, suggesting she had been in an intimate encounter shortly before her death. But with whom, given that Shakil allegedly wasn't home that day? Syed held a press conference, presenting extensive evidence, including text, voice, and video messages from Samia, where she repeatedly expressed fear for her life. It is believed that the police may have taken bribes, leading to the immediate arrest of Shahid and Shakil. Investigations revealed that they never intended to let Samia's return to Dubai. They forced her to go to the house given to her as a wedding gift, where they searched for her passport and tickets, which she had given to a friend to keep. In a fit of rage, Shakil physically restrained her. When she tried to escape, they caught up with her on the stairs. Shakil strangled her with her scarf, while Shahid held her legs, ensuring she had no chance to survive. Shakil later confessed to this crime at the police station, although Shahid denied any involvement in the killing of his own daughter. In addition to Shahid and Shakil, Samia's uncle, who received a fake report before the autopsy, and the police chief in charge of the initial investigation have both been arrested. In court, Shakil retracted his confession, claiming it was made under coercion. He spent just over 2 years in prison before being released on bail in September 2018. In 2019, he remarried and again tried to move to the UK, but still without success. Samia's father, Shahid, was imprisoned from July to December 2016 and later released on bail. He died in January 2018 at the age of 52 due to deteriorating health. Before his death, he maintained his innocence and denied any involvement in his daughter's death. Samia's uncle and the commissioner were also released in the fall of 2016 without facing any penalties. Shortly afterwards, arrest warrants were issued in Pakistan for Samia's mother and younger sister, but they quickly returned to Bradford. Her younger sister, Mata, later gave a detailed interview, which accused her and Syed of being the cause of their family's breakdown, attempting to tarnish their reputations. Welcome back, mystery lovers. Today's case is going to keep you on the edge of your seat. The case of Crystal Perry. Crystal Perry was born on August 23, 1963, in Rumford, Maine, a small town in the United States. As the youngest of 10 children, her parents faced great challenges in providing for their large family. In difficult circumstances, Crystal and her siblings grew up quite independently, with her parents being too busy to look after all the children. Fortunately, Crystal's older sister, who was only 12 years old when Crystal was born, took on the role of mother and looked after her younger brothers and sisters. Growing up in such a difficult environment, they all wanted to start their own lives as soon as possible, so her siblings lived in different cities and states. Crystal also dreamed of starting a family. While in high school, she met Tom and they eventually got married. Initially, they moved to California, but Crystal soon realized that city life was not for her. After a year and a half, they decided to return to Maine and settled in Bridgeton, a small town about an hour away from Crystal's hometown. The quaint town is famous for being the setting of Stephen King's novel, The Mist. Crystal worked at a local shoe store, while Tom held various part-time jobs. Later, Crystal found out she was pregnant and they welcomed their daughter, Sarah. Although Tom initially wanted to be a father, his relationship with Crystal became complicated after their daughter was born. He began spending more and more time at a local bar, wasting almost all of their money on alcohol. At one point, he even took all of Crystal's savings to buy groceries, leaving them without food. The financial burden of Tom's drinking problem became too much for their relationship, and Crystal eventually decided to file for divorce. After the divorce, Tom still visited his daughter occasionally, but he was not actively involved in her life. The situation became worse when Tom started dating someone new and his girlfriend began harassing Crystal, constantly calling and threatening her, visiting her house and causing chaos in public. all because she could not accept Crystal's previous marriage to Tom. Crystal was hesitant about Sarah visiting her father because she was worried that his new girlfriend could endanger Sarah's safety. After her parents' divorce, Crystal moved in with her mother. She spent years saving money, and finally, she was able to buy her own house. The house was located in the suburb of Bridgeton, near a peaceful lake and a forest. Crystal and Sarah were delighted to finally have a place they could call their own. Crystal grew up in a large family, so when she had her own daughter, she gave her as much time, attention, and love as she could. After a long day at work, Crystal and her daughter, Sarah, would often rent a movie or just talk for hours. One evening, on May 10, 1994, when Crystal was 30 and Sarah was 12, they watched the solar eclipse together. The next day went as usual. Crystal went to work and Sarah went to school. That evening, they had dinner and Crystal put Sarah to bed. A few hours later, Sarah woke to the sound of her mother screaming. At first, she thought Crystal was on the phone, arguing with someone. However, she quickly realized the situation was much more serious. Crystal's screams were loud and frantic, making Sarah think someone was attacking her mother. With the bedroom door ajar, Sarah mustered up the courage to approach, despite her mounting fear. She moved closer to the door, and as she listened, she realized the scream was coming from the kitchen. However, from where she stood, Sarah couldn't see what was happening. Sarah was terrified, not daring to move or make a sound, afraid of revealing her location. Then she heard footsteps, and her heart sank as she assumed that her mother's attacker was now coming for her. In a desperate attempt to escape, she hid behind the bed and waited anxiously for the door to open. However, instead of the door, she heard the sound of a kitchen drawer sliding open, followed by the sound of someone rummaging through utensils. Her mother's continuous screams and desperate pleas for forgiveness filled the house, and in the next few seconds, Sarah heard what sounded like someone had started stabbing her mother with a knife. With each brutal stab, her mother's cries grew fainter and fainter until they strangely stopped. Gathering her courage, Sarah finally left the room and went to the kitchen. What she saw was a horrifying sight. The only light came from the moon shining through the window, as the kitchen lights were off. The clock on the wall read 1 a.m. When she entered the kitchen, she saw her mother lying on the floor in a large pool of blood that covered the entire floor. Despite her shock, Sarah knew she had to call for help immediately. Next to her mother's hand was a phone. Sarah quickly picked up the phone and dialed 911, but she only received complete silence on the other end of the line. She then ran to Crystal's room to try the second phone. But unfortunately, it didn't work either. Despite trying several times and getting the same result, Sarah realized that she had only one option left: to seek help from the neighbors. Braving the cold of the May night in only her pajamas and bare feet, Sarah ran out of the house and into the street. Her main concern was to find someone to help her injured mother. She started running to the nearest house, about half a mile away, towards the center of the city. However, when she knocked repeatedly, no one answered. Undeterred, Sarah continued to run to other nearby houses, knocking on each door, but still no one answered. Finally, after several attempts at many houses, Sarah arrived at a local Italian restaurant, whose owner lived in the adjacent building. She knocked desperately and finally got an answer. The owner, shocked by Sarah's panicked state, let her in and listened as she explained the urgency of the situation. Her mother had been attacked and she desperately needed help. Sarah then called 911 herself and reported what had happened. The police immediately arrived at their home. When they examined the front door glass, they discovered a fingerprint, which they quickly identified as Sarah's. A thorough search of the crime scene found no other fingerprints. However, the kitchen floor revealed several bloody shoe prints. Police took photographs to determine the size and style of the shoes, suspecting they belonged to the killer. The shoe prints led to Sarah's bedroom but mysteriously stopped at the entrance, as if the killer had returned without entering the room. Police noticed two unusual details at the crime scene. It was clear that the killer had tried to wipe some of the blood off the floor. However, it was clear that the killer could not remove all of the blood, as there was blood everywhere. However, there were also other drops that fell to the floor at right angles, and judging by the splatters from a greater height, the police speculated that the killer had injured himself during the murder, and that the blood was theirs. This theory was reinforced by the discovery of a trail of blood leading to a roll of tissue paper, but there were no remaining rolls nearby. It is possible that the killer used the tissue paper to stop the bleeding after being injured during the murder, and then immediately left the crime scene. Medical experts discovered more than 50 stab wounds on Crystal's body, indicating that this was a violent and intentional attack. The murder weapon, later determined to be a kitchen knife, was not found at the scene, suggesting that the killer had taken it with them when they left. During this process, a piece of the knife broke off and was embedded in Crystal's body, further highlighting the force used. Additional testing revealed that Crystal had been sexually assaulted, allowing experts to collect DNA and blood samples from the perpetrator. Despite this crucial evidence, the investigation was plagued by unexpected delays. Due to a lack of funding, the local lab was overwhelmed, so it would take at least 6 months to get the results. This forced the police to begin their investigation without any concrete evidence. Initially, the police ruled out a robbery, as nothing appeared to have been missing from the house. They also noted that there were no signs of forced entry, leading them to conclude that the perpetrator was likely someone Crystal knew, as she likely opened the door for them. Since she was wearing pajamas at the time of the incident, it is unlikely that she was waiting for guests, leading police to speculate about a potential relationship between Crystal and her attacker. The police have two main theories about the case. Crystal knew the killer and let them in willingly, or the killer was a stranger who knocked on the door and tricked Crystal into opening the door. To gather more information, the police decide to start by questioning the only witness, Sarah. At the hospital, where Sarah is being checked, the police ask her why she ran to a neighbor's house for help instead of calling 911 from her own home. Sarah explains that she couldn't use her phone because it wasn't working, but the investigation finds this explanation suspicious, as both Sarah's and Crystal's phones were working properly when checked by the police at the crime scene. Police believe Sarah may have become confused due to the stress of the situation. Initially, they considered the possibility that the first phone was inoperable, as the first caller had turned off her phone and needed to reset it to make another call. As for the second phone, they did not rule out the possibility that Sarah may have dialed the wrong number in her haste or that the phone line may have been temporarily disconnected due to the rain. As the investigation continued, the police asked Sarah if she had seen the killer. Sarah replied that she had been in her bedroom during the incident. However, the police were a little skeptical of her story and asked how she knew her mother had been attacked with a knife. Sarah's explanation was that it was obvious. But the police continued to press her. They felt that she might be withholding some information and that she had actually seen the killer. In the 3 days after the murder, the police interviewed Sarah 18 times. They hoped her story would change, but she stuck to her original account of events. Then the police found their first important clue. A local shoe store had a pair of boots with soles that matched the bloody footprints found at the scene. They also discovered that Crystal had been harassed by Teresa, the girlfriend of her ex-husband Tom. Although the killer was clearly a man, the police decided to investigate Teresa because she had repeatedly threatened to kill Crystal. Teresa may have had someone help her commit the crime, but the police did not find any evidence to support this idea. During their investigation, they discovered that Crystal was in a relationship with a man named Dennis at the time of her death. The two had met 2 years before Dennis started working at the shoe store where Crystal worked. They began dating soon after and eventually became engaged, although they never married. The police found that their relationship was strained, with frequent arguments between the couple and Dennis sometimes engaging in aggressive behavior, such as breaking things and punching walls. However, the police did not find any evidence that he had ever harmed Crystal. The day after the murder, the police came to Dennis's house. When he opened the door, they asked him if he had left the night before or if he had seen Crystal. Dennis immediately responded by asking if Crystal was dead, and he passed out shortly after. After regaining consciousness, Dennis began answering the police's questions. He explained that he had originally planned to visit Crystal that evening, but he had been late for work because he had helped a friend fix his car. When he finally returned home, he called Crystal, but she told him it was too late to visit. This led to an argument and Dennis stayed home. Although the police could not be 100% sure that he was telling the truth, they were able to verify that he had helped his friend fix his car that evening. Dennis also voluntarily took a lie detector test, which the police found no signs of lying. Although the police noticed that he had the same shoe size as the killer, they did not find any matching shoes in Dennis's home. He agreed to provide a DNA sample, but he asked the police to do him a favor, saying that if they decided to arrest him, they should enter his workplace through the back door to avoid disturbing others. He explained that his boss had always treated him well and he did not want to disrupt work. During the investigation, the police contacted Crystal's best friend, who lived in another town. This friend shared a disturbing conversation she had had with Crystal just a few weeks earlier. In the story, Crystal expressed fear for Dennis. Their arguments escalated and Dennis became increasingly aggressive. Crystal considered ending the relationship but hesitated for fear of Dennis's reaction. The police then went to Crystal's workplace to further question her coworkers, but were unable to gather any useful information. As soon as the police left Crystal's workplace, Dennis entered and began asking what the coworkers had told the police. Despite the police's efforts, no evidence was found to implicate Dennis, and had to wait months for the DNA results, so they continued to search for other potential leads. This led them to a local man named Donnie, who had gotten drunk at a party and started bragging about killing Crystal. During the investigation, police brought Donnie in for questioning. However, the man claimed that he had no memory of attending a party and denied any involvement in the murder. Police later discovered that Donnie was an alcoholic and a notorious liar. In another development, a witness reported seeing a black pickup truck with New Hampshire plates near Crystal's neighborhood, but this lead ultimately went unanswered. Another witness came forward describing an incident in which she drove past Crystal's house on the night of the murder. She recalled hearing sirens, assuming they were related to her boyfriend, who lived down the street and was a frequent troublemaker. At the same time, she saw a car with headlights following her at high speed. Thinking that the driver was chasing her, she turned onto another street. However, the car passed her. Police have not been able to confirm whether the car was related to Crystal's murder. The investigation is still ongoing, and they have had difficulty finding any concrete evidence. In an effort to get the case back on track, Crystal's family has offered a $10,000 reward for any information and has posted flyers around town to attract potential witnesses. However, Crystal's ex-husband's girlfriend, Teresa, has been seen repeatedly tearing up these flyers. Crystal's ex-husband, Tom, was investigated thoroughly, but police eventually ruled him out as a suspect. He was an alcoholic and had become worse over the years, leaving him almost drunk. In this state, it seemed impossible for him to commit such a crime, and he had no apparent motive. The police investigated 2 other men Crystal had dated after her divorce, but found no connection between them and the crime. All the men, including Tom, provided DNA samples. The police waited for the test results, which took 9 months. When they did, they showed that the blood and semen samples did not match any of the suspects, including Dennis. With no new leads, the police requested a DNA sample from Dennis again for further testing, but the results remained the same. With no progress, they decided to re-interview their only witness, Sarah. They still believed that she was lying to them, or that her mind had blocked out the horrific memories of her mother's murder and that she had actually seen the killer. To investigate further, they traveled to Texas, where Sarah was living with her aunt, and took a polygraph test. The results showed no deception on Sarah's part. However, the police continued to interrogate her over and over again, asking the same questions. But she repeatedly insisted that she had not seen the killer. Ultimately, the case remained unsolved for years, with police continuing to interview witnesses and potential suspects, but without any significant breakthroughs. In the late 1990s, the FBI DNA database became available, allowing police to upload a DNA sample of Crystal's killer. However, no match was found. A new police officer took over the case in 1999, determined to review all the available evidence and collect more DNA samples from men in the town and surrounding areas. Advances in laboratory technology allowed for faster testing, and hundreds of samples were collected. Unfortunately, none of these samples matched the killer's DNA. The police also asked Sarah to work with a psychologist to explore the possibility of recovering repressed memories of the crime. Sarah agreed, but the psychologist concluded that her claim of not seeing the perpetrator was true and that she had not actually repressed any memories. Years passed. And despite the police's continued efforts, the case remained unsolved due to a lack of new leads. The case took a surprising turn in 2006 when police received news of a DNA match. A DNA sample entered into an FBI database matched blood and semen found at Crystal's crime scene. The DNA belonged to Michael Hutchinson, a man who had never been investigated or suspected in the case. Further investigation revealed that in 2003, Michael had been arrested and convicted of assault with a weapon, resulting in a 6-month prison sentence followed by 3 years of probation, during which time his DNA was collected. A DNA sample from Michael was initially collected but not uploaded to the FBI database and remained on file at the lab. Years later, Michael was arrested for driving drunk with a child in the car. After being released on bail, he failed to appear in court and was subsequently sent to jail. On the day of his wedding, Michael was arrested and taken into custody. A new DNA sample was taken from him, and this time, it was uploaded to the database immediately. Soon after, the police on Crystal's case received a match. They informed Sarah of the development but asked her to keep it a secret until formal charges were filed. The police also asked Sarah if she knew the suspect, and she said no. With Michael in custody, the police began to slowly build their case to ensure that the suspect had no chance of escaping punishment. They discovered that at the time of the murder, Michael lived in Bridgeton, just 2 miles from Crystal's home. Michael was 19 and lived near the Italian restaurant where Sarah called the police. Since Michael frequently visited his mother's house, just a short distance from Crystal's home, the police suspected that Michael may have seen Crystal on several occasions. The police visited Michael in prison and asked him about the murder, but Michael denied any involvement and claimed that he did not know Crystal. However, the police were skeptical of Michael's story, as his DNA was found on Crystal's body and his blood was found at the crime scene. While in custody, the police made an interesting observation about Michael. He had a large scar on the palm of his hand, which appeared to match the wound that Crystal's killer may have suffered during the murder. Although the scar alone was not enough to prove Michael guilty in court, the presence of his DNA firmly linked him to the crime. He was later charged with murder. The prosecution presented evidence that Michael, a user of illegal drugs, had frequently passed by Crystal's house, and that on the fateful night he decided to attack her. But he refused to plead guilty, so it is impossible to know how it all happened. But with the evidence available, the outcome was clear: Michael attacked and killed Crystal. During the trial, an explanation was also sought for the killer not leaving any fingerprints at the crime scene, as Michael worked as a bricklayer. Over time, people who do this work often have worn and torn patterns on their palms, making it impossible for them to leave fingerprints on the surface. In his testimony, Michael stated that he met Crystal at a bar and they went back to her place, where they had consensual sex. A man in a black motorcycle jacket broke into the house, attacked Michael, and killed Crystal. Michael regained consciousness and tried to fight off the attacker, but he was injured in the hand and the attacker escaped. However, Michael then left the crime scene without a valid reason, which raised doubts about his story. There were several inconsistencies, including the fact that the only shoe prints at the scene were Michael's, suggesting that if his testimony was true, the intruder would have had to remove his shoes before entering, which is highly unlikely. Additionally, there were no other signs of a break-in or struggle at the scene. The trial ended on April 9, 2007, with a guilty verdict for Michael. He was sentenced to life in prison without parole. Michael remains incarcerated to this day. The traumatic event of her mother's murder had a profound impact on Sarah. However, over time, she found the strength to rebuild her life. Sarah pursued further education, pursued a writing career, and eventually published a book chronicling her mother's murder, compiling all the available information. Furthermore, while writing the book, Sarah discovered new facts about the case that the police had overlooked. She discovered that Michael often borrowed his father's car, a black Ford pickup with New Hampshire license plates. This information was important because a witness had previously reported seeing a similar car near Crystal's house on the night of the murder. Another witness also reported seeing a car with its high beams speeding past her house that night. She initially thought the police were headed for her boyfriend's house because she mistook the sirens of an ambulance for police sirens. The woman's boyfriend was revealed to be Michael. The police had recorded his name and address in the report. However, they did not investigate him further at that time. Had the police investigated him further, they might have discovered the cut on his hand, potentially solving the case sooner. Unfortunately, past events cannot be changed. Welcome back, detectives. Let's dive into another horrible case. The case of Stephanie Scott. Stephanie Scott is 26 years old, a kind and intelligent person who always has a smile on her face. She was very active as a child, participating in school clubs and sports. As an adult, she followed in her father Robert's footsteps as a teacher, sharing his passion for education. She teaches English and drama at Leon High School and takes great pride in her work. Stephanie and her fiancé Aaron have known each other since they were children. They spent time together, shared common interests, and played sports in their hometown. They were best friends until Aaron turned 21, when their relationship blossomed into love. In April 2015, the couple was busy preparing for their wedding, scheduled for April 11th. Stephanie, a perfectionist, spent months planning every detail, from the preparations to their honeymoon in Tahiti. She had just had her bachelorette party and the couple had learned their first dance for their wedding day. Everything was almost ready, but sadly their dream did not come true. April 2015 was a reminder to Stephanie and Aaron that their wedding day was approaching. While Aaron had plans to attend a party in the suburbs, he invited Stephanie to come along, but she decided to stay and focus on finishing up work before their honeymoon. On Easter Sunday, April 5, 2015, Stephanie arrived at her school in Leon, New South Wales, at around 11 a.m. to hand over some work to her teacher. She parked her car on the street and walked to meet a colleague, with whom she unlocked the school gate. Stephanie then locked the gate and, key in hand, headed to the English teacher's office. There, she emailed a bus company to confirm transportation arrangements for her wedding guests. Stephanie spent a few hours working, feeling happy that she had completed all her tasks. When she was done, she left the administration building, heading toward the gate to leave. Aaron, knowing that Stephanie had left and would be away for a few hours, became anxious as the evening approached. He had texted her the day before and received a prompt response. However, on April 5th, he received no response from Stephanie. Returning home after 7 p.m., Aaron found that Stephanie had not returned, and her car was not on the street. He tried to control his anxiety, reassuring himself that the stress of the upcoming wedding and being away from school for such a long time might be affecting Stephanie, making her want some alone time. However, such complete silence was out of character for her. Even as she eagerly planned her wedding, Stephanie enjoyed every minute, eagerly sharing details about her wedding dress and menu. She did not appear nervous or bored, but instead excited and ready for her big day. Aaron's concern for Stephanie grew, and he couldn't sleep. The next morning, he sent her another text, but when he didn't receive a response, he decided to contact her family for support. It had been more than 24 hours since he had been unable to reach Stephanie, prompting Aaron to go to the Lyon Police Department to officially report her missing. Police opened an investigation, beginning with a search of the area around Stephanie's last known location. When they discovered that her car was also missing, they began to speculate about what might have happened. One possible scenario was that Stephanie had left school and gotten into a car accident, or perhaps gotten stuck in a ditch or creek. A search effort was launched, with helicopters scanning the area from above and police units conducting ground searches. Last known location of the high school where she worked. Affected by Easter Sunday and the limited number of people at the school, there were few witnesses, complicating the police investigation. When they checked the school's alarm system, they discovered that Stephanie had turned it off in her classroom at 1:30 p.m. and turned it back on 8 minutes later, pinpointing her exact location at that time. However, this detail was the only information the police were able to gather. When they attempted to track Stephanie's phone, they discovered that it was turned off and there was no recent activity on her bank account or social media after Saturday, April 4th. Local news began reporting the story on April 7th, as hundreds of people in the small town searched for any information about Stephanie. Stephanie's mother, Marilyn, expressed concern that if her daughter was not found soon, it could indicate that something terrible had happened. Police refocused their search efforts on the school, using digital mapping technology to examine the premises and pinpoint the specific room where Stephanie was last seen working before she went missing. A witness who was near Lyon High School on Easter Sunday reported hearing unusual noises around 2 p.m., including rustling and dragging sounds. At the time, the witness did not think much of seeing Stephanie's car parked under the covered walkway. However, the car was gone by then. Another witness, a school employee, had a strange conversation with a cleaner the day after Stephanie went missing. The employee mentioned the rumors surrounding Stephanie's disappearance to the cleaner and asked when he had last seen her. The cleaner replied that he had not seen Stephanie on the day she went missing. When asked if he thought Stephanie might have run away due to post-wedding stress, the cleaner smiled strangely and nervously, making the employee feel uncomfortable. The employee also noticed that the cleaner had scratches on her face. The police decided to question the cleaner, 24-year-old Vincent Stanford, for more information. Vincent told the police that he had stopped by the school to take out the trash, despite not being scheduled to work that day. He claimed that he did not stay long because he was in a hurry to go shopping. Vincent insisted that he had not seen Stephanie at the time and wished them luck in their search. He added that he had left the school after 3 p.m. to go to the store where he usually shopped. However, when the police contacted the store, they discovered that it was closed that day, contrary to Vincent's statement. This led the police to suspect Vincent of lying, and he became a suspect in the investigation. The police decided to conduct a thorough interview with Vincent and went to his home where he lived with his mother. When they arrived, they found Vincent absent, but his mother allowed them to enter the house. The police search of the house eventually uncovered a set of keys attached to a red and white string. These keys were very similar to the missing Stephanie's keys. As the police continued to collect evidence, Vincent returned home and was immediately arrested by the police, while his car was also impounded. In the back seat, they found several MDF boards that appeared to be covered in blood. The police also noticed that the tire marks in front of the house did not match those of Vincent's car. Additionally, a used condom was found on the ground with the wrapper in the bedroom. The police questioned Vincent about his whereabouts that day. He pointed to a camera in the front seat and claimed that he was taking pictures. The police asked to see the contents of the camera, and Vincent reluctantly agreed. When they turned on the camera, they saw a horrifying image of a charred, dead woman lying in a wooded area. Vincent initially tried to dismiss the image as a still from a movie he had starred in, thinking it was funny. However, the police quickly realized that the image was actually a photo of a real crime scene, with the victim being Stephanie. Vincent Stanford, a janitor at Leon High School, was immediately arrested. A search of his phone and laptop revealed a collection of images, including photos of young girls from school and from the internet, as well as photos of women he had apparently stalked. The discovery painted a dark picture of Vincent's behavior. Although Stephanie Scott's body has not been found, Vincent Stanford, 24, was charged with murder on April 9th. News of the arrest spread quickly. Stephanie's car had previously been found abandoned in a remote area about 5 miles from where she was last known to be. However, her body remains missing, prompting the search to continue. Police are still working to determine the exact location where her body was photographed. On April 17th, 5 days after Stephanie went missing, another witness came forward. He reported seeing a car near a canal around 4 p.m. on Easter Sunday. A man got out of the car and threw what appeared to be a laptop into the water before driving away. Police later recovered the laptop from the bottom of the canal, confirming it was Stephanie's. The search for Stephanie's body continues in the New South Wales Rivers area, where police divers have been scouring the waterways. Reporter Natalie Cooper, in a live broadcast, discussed the ongoing search for Stephanie's body. Meanwhile, police have expanded their search to fields and vineyards near where Stephanie's red Mazda was found earlier this week. Despite a search by police divers in the canal, Stephanie's body has not been found. Reporter Natalie reported that a makeshift shrine near the site of the tragedy was visited by many people that morning. Bystanders and her family and fiancé had visited the shrine the night before, surname lighting candles and praying together. Vincent, who was in police custody, asked to speak to the police. During the conversation, he gave them detailed information about the case, including the location of Stephanie's body. According to Vincent, on the day of the incident, Stephanie was working on her computer in the upstairs staff room with the office door open. Vincent was using a vacuum to clean out the trash and needed to move some bins upstairs. As he approached the room, he saw Stephanie. Vincent told the police that he suddenly had the idea of killing her and quickly went home to get his special kit, which included handcuffs, Viagra, a knife, and toiletries. He also did a Google search on violent crimes on the way back. On his way back, Vincent encountered Stephanie as she was leaving. She smiled and wished him a happy Easter as she passed by. However, in a sudden and unexpected move, Vincent grabbed her and dragged her into a nearby storage room. When police questioned him about the scratches on his face, he revealed that they were from Stephanie's microphone and her fingernails when she defended herself while he tried to kill her. Vincent described the attack on Stephanie in detail, saying that he approached her from behind, covered her mouth with one hand and held her waist with the other. He took her to the storage room, slamming the door. Inside, he violently threw her to the ground, hitting her repeatedly. After the attack, Vincent used a knife to kill Stephanie. He admitted that the act was motivated by homicidal urges, revealing that he had sadistic thoughts and had committed murders before. Although he speculated that he may have had some psychological issues, Vincent said that he did not hate his victims but instead felt pleasure from the act of killing. Vincent then felt hungry and went home to eat a sandwich and drink coffee, leaving Stephanie's body in the storage room. After eating, he returned to the school and placed her body in the trunk of his car. He then drove home. On Easter Monday, Vincent took Stephanie's car and drove to a national park. There, he removed her body from the trunk and removed her clothes. He observed that her face had multiple injuries, including severe bruising and swelling on the right side of her face, as well as bruising under her eye. Vincent then covered the body with branches and poured gasoline over her. He lit the gasoline with a match. Before leaving, he stayed at the scene for a while and took several photographs. After setting up the camera to take pictures of Stephanie's body, Vincent waited 5 minutes to ensure the fire had burned out before leaving the scene. He abandoned Stephanie's car on a deserted country road and walked back to town. During questioning, Vincent denied abusing Stephanie despite police evidence suggesting he had abused her, leading to additional charges of causing grievous bodily harm and injury. When questioned about her earrings and wedding ring, he claimed he did not remember taking them off and may have thrown them away with the other items. In fact, Vincent took Stephanie's wedding ring and graduation ring, along with her earrings, and sent them to his twin brother, Marcus, in Adelaide. Marcus sold the items at a jewelry store and later destroyed Stephanie's driver's license after taking a photo of it. Vincent's brother Marcus Stanford, 24, was arrested at his Adelaide Hills home around 7 a.m. in connection with Stephanie's murder, leaving neighbors shocked and unsettled. Marcus, who appeared inconspicuous, worked on a flower farm, where colleagues described him as quiet and reserved, barely communicating with them outside of work hours. Marcus Stanford appeared without a lawyer during the trial and, with a strong Dutch accent, told the judge he had never been to Leeton and saw no reason to go there. Despite his testimony, he was taken to Sydney the following morning under police escort, where he was taken into custody. The search for Stephanie finally ended. Following Vincent's confession, police discovered her body in a national park 60 miles from Leon's secondary school. Detailed investigations revealed that Stephanie had been brutally beaten in the head a total of 40 times, resulting in her death. Her body was then dumped and burned. Photos found on Vincent's phone were confirmed to be of Stephanie, leaving no doubt as to his guilt. Both Vincent and his brother, Marcus, were subsequently brought to trial. Vincent initially denied any wrongdoing. However, based on the evidence presented by the police, it was decided that the case could lead to a conviction. Vincent was deemed a dangerous serial killer. He appeared to lack emotion and empathy, was cruel and indifferent, often laughing and not taking the situation seriously. A deeper look into Vincent Stanford's past revealed a number of disturbing facts. Born in Australia, Vincent moved to the Netherlands with his family when he was 3 years old before eventually returning to New South Wales. As a child, Vincent had disturbing thoughts. At age 7, he fantasized about murder. By age 12, he had nearly strangled a teacher, leading his classmates to label him a psychopath. Due to his violent and disobedient behavior issues, Vincent was sent to a reform school. He later expressed feelings of being unable to fit in with society and was later admitted to a psychiatric facility, where he was diagnosed with autism and oppositional defiant disorder. Vincent was rejected by both the university and the army after his release, so he worked a variety of jobs until he landed a job as a janitor at Leon Junior High School. His initial 5-week contract was later extended, allowing him to continue working at the school. During his time there, Vincent would often sneak into the girls' restroom during lunch breaks to secretly observe the students. An investigation of Vincent's phone revealed that he had been stalking several girls at the school, as well as 2 women who worked at nearby stores, before finally killing Stephanie. Police discovered a large collection of photos, nearly 2,000, of a young girl on his phone, along with diary entries documenting his obsession with the girl. In these diary entries, Vincent detailed his attempts to follow the girl home, recording her departures and even speculating about whether anyone else was with her. One diary entry stated, "She was home alone at 3:40 p.m., plenty of time to kidnap her." It appears that Vincent initially targeted the young girl, but once she left town, he shifted his focus to Stephanie, who worked at the school and was ultimately his victim. After a thorough search of Vincent's car, police found evidence of Stephanie's DNA on MDF boards. Inside Vincent's house, they discovered Stephanie's blood on several items, a knife, several condom packs, and her bra. Vincent's twin brother, Marcus, admitted to his role in the crime, including selling Stephanie's ring, destroying evidence, and helping Vincent cover up the truth. As a result, Marcus was sentenced to 15 months in prison without the possibility of parole. His sentence was for his involvement in the murder of Stephanie Scott, and his prison term was set to end on September 9, 2016. If Marcus had not pleaded guilty, he would have received an 18-month sentence. In October 2016, Marcus Stanford was released from prison. After his release, more than 60 people signed a petition expressing their disagreement with the court's decision and asking for an appeal. The petition describes the court's decision as unacceptable. After his release, Marcus briefly returned to his hometown of Leon with his mother. However, people in his hometown made it clear that he was not welcome, forcing him to leave again. His current whereabouts are unknown. Since his release, Marcus has publicly apologized for his actions and promised not to cause any more trouble. He has admitted that his past behavior was foolish and has expressed remorse for the harm he has caused. Marcus has also stated that he has no intention of contacting his brother Vincent and does not want to reconcile with him. Steve, the twins' father, he is shocked, scared, and does not want to talk to or see Vincent. Steve admits that he does not understand why Vincent committed these crimes. Vincent Stanford was sentenced to life in prison for murder and 15 years for sexual violence, both sentences effective April 8, 2015. Stephanie's mother, Marilyn, expressed her grief, saying that Vincent could not cope with his own life, so he took her daughter's life. Marilyn believed that this deprived Stephanie of the chance to have a happy future. Although the family did not know the full extent of Stephanie's pain, they knew that she had suffered unbearable pain. Therefore, the family wanted to stay away from the public to mourn their daughter and overcome the pain. In the future, Stephanie's family members have decided not to participate in interviews or television shows or answer questions. However, they have planned a final celebration. The day after the trial, Stephanie's family planned a gathering to remember her life on what would have been her 28th birthday, a birthday they would celebrate for the second time without her. They held a 3 p.m. tea party with peppermint cookies, which Stephanie's mother invited everyone to attend. In addition, the family is campaigning for stricter background checks and assessments for school staff in the hope of preventing incidents like the one that affected Stephanie and reducing the risk to students. After Stephanie's tragic death, the family suffered another tragic loss when her father, Robert, died in an accident involving a falling tree. He was buried near his daughter. Her boyfriend, Aaron, in an attempt to escape the painful memories of New South Wales, moved to Europe. However, he eventually found love again and became engaged to a woman named Samantha 5 years after Stephanie's death. Welcome back. detectives, let's dive into another horrible case. The case of Antonia Barra. Antonia Barra was born in the late 1980s into a warm and united family. Her family lived in a spacious home that comfortably accommodated. Her parents, Alejandro and Marcela, nurtured their 5 children, 4 daughters and 1 son, creating a warm environment filled with care and attention. The children were generally kind and well-behaved, rarely causing trouble. However, Antonia distinguished herself from her siblings with her exceptional perceptiveness, sense of responsibility, and ambition from an early age, making her a special source of pride for her parents. Antonia was a top student who had a good relationship with her teachers and clear future goals. She dreamed of traveling and leading a fulfilling life. After graduating high school, she was accepted into her preferred university and began studying a popular major. As a freshman, she focused on mastering the fundamentals of her future career, while also engaging in social and academic events, where she made new friends who shared her interests and ambitions. One of her closest friends was Consuela Uribe, a law student. They enjoyed spending time together, going out, shopping, and attending parties. This brings them even close. Martin was born and raised in Tomoko, Chile, the same city as Antonia. He comes from a large family, including parents, a sister, and a brother. When he was young, he had a child with a woman named Daniela Alvarez, but their relationship ended shortly right after they give birth. From 2015 to 2017, Antonia and Martin communicated through a social network. At that time, Antonia was a teenager. They exchanged messages and commented on each other's photos, but their interactions were limited to online communication. Eventually, they met in person, which sadly resulted in a tragic outcome. When Antonia broke up with her boyfriend Rodrigo, Consuela suggested that she find a way to distract herself from the sadness. Struggling with the breakup, Antonia decided to take her friend's advice to help clear her mind and forget her troubles for a while. They planned a trip to celebrate Chile's Independence Day on September 18th, choosing the tourist town of Pucón as their destination. By chance, Antonia encountered Martin there. He was in Pucón to attend an electronic music festival at a local club called Black Room, where a DJ friend of his was performing. On September 17th, around 6:30 p.m., Consuela, Antonia, and 3 friends, including Consuela's boyfriend, headed to Pucón. The trip went well, and upon arrival, they stayed in different accommodations. The girls stayed at a summer house owned by the Consuela family. After 8 p.m., they started getting ready for a party at the popular venue, Black Room, which promised to be an unforgettable experience. Before leaving, Antonia messaged her father, Alejandro, who reminded her to be careful and cautious with strangers. She replied, assuring him that being prudent was her top priority. Antonia and Consuela got ready and went to the club, where they ordered food and drinks. Antonia and Martin had a great time chatting and dancing. The Black Room Club turned out to be the perfect place for their unexpected reunion. They were delighted by this chance meeting and spent the evening together, enjoying each other's company. It was clear they had a mutual affection. Antonia would occasionally join Consuela and greet the male acquaintances she had traveled with, moving between different bars. However, she didn't realize how much she had consumed. The combination of the long drive and an empty stomach contributed to her inebriation, which was unusual for her. Around 6:45 a.m., Consuela found her friend Antonia happily chatting with a mutual acquaintance, Emilio. Consuela suggested it was time to leave, but Antonia insisted on staying, feeling good and wanting to enjoy the night longer. Despite Consuela's advice to stop drinking and rethink her choice, Antonia remained determined to stay at the club while Consuela went home. This decision would later prove to be a mistake for Antonia. Emilio, who was there, became a witness to what happened next and provided details during the investigation and in court. He observed that Martin approached Antonia, started a conversation, and then took her by the hand to lead her toward the exit. Emilio noticed that Antonia was acting strangely. He wasn't sure if Antonia was participating in the conversation or simply confused by the alcohol. However, she didn't seem to mind being taken away, or maybe she didn't even realize it was happening. Emilio believed that Martin had asked her to join him and that she had agreed. However, the external surveillance footage revealed a different version of events. Martin's friends reported that they left the club in 2 cars, but there wasn't enough space for Martin and Antonia in either vehicle, so they decided to walk. As they walked, they encountered a store. Surveillance footage showed that Martin forced Antonia to go inside. She was unsteady and unable to fight back. Martin, who was a bit more sober, managed to exert some control over the situation. They were recorded on camera multiple times throughout the night. During their time together, Martin was overly affectionate and attempted to kiss Antonia, but she did not reciprocate and tried to stay away. Once they arrived at the rented house, the other friends paid little attention to she. Only Barbara, a 19 years old who had just joined and wasn't drinking, noticed that the couple appeared to be drunk. Later, they went upstairs. Around 9 a.m., Consuela received a voice message from Antonia. At first, she found it difficult to understand the message. After listening closely, she deciphered that Antonia was asking to be picked up. Since Antonia couldn't share her exact location, Consuela used GPS to locate her. Consuela and her boyfriend, Jose, then headed to the specified location. When Consuela and Jose entered the house, they found Martin naked and using a pillow to cover himself. Consuela asked him where Antonia was, but he said he didn't know. They then went upstairs and discovered Antonia in a bedroom, lying on the bed in her underwear and quietly crying. Jose picked her up and took her to the car. Consuela asked what had happened, but Antonia could only cry sob. Consuela and Jose tried to comfort her by hugging her and encouraging her to talk. Once they arrived back at the summer house, Antonia opened up about everything. She revealed that Martin had taken advantage of her against her will, leaving her feeling helpless. Though her memories were blurry, she clearly understood that he had harmed her. This incident had taken place when they went upstairs, and afterward, he left her alone and vanished. After hearing about the incident, Jose and Consuela urged Antonia to report Martin to the police and seek justice. However, she was too afraid that her parents and the public would find out, so she decided to silently cope with her trauma and heal on her own. She asked them not to tell anyone about what happened. Then, Antonia received a message from her father checking in on her and joking about whether she had been drinking too much. To avoid raising suspicion, Consuela responded casually, which unintentionally revealed her true feelings. The next day, Antonia met with Martin to discuss what had happened, but he was dismissive and arrogant, insisting that the previous night's incidents were consensual. At that moment, Antonia understood that she would not receive the truth or an apology from him, and she knew she had to try to get through it. Antonia was suffering from intimacy trauma syndrome, which affects her physical, emotional, cognitive, and social behaviors. This condition can manifest right after a traumatic incident or even months or years later. Antonia was going through an intense phase of this syndrome alone, unable to escape feelings of distress, distraction, anxiety, and confusion, often alternating with hysterical outbursts and crying. Antonia experienced a strong desire to cleanse herself, which caused her nausea and occasional vomiting. For 3 weeks, she kept to herself and tried to behave as if everything was normal. A childhood friend remarked that they hadn't noticed anything unusual about her, but her classmates were aware of her memory loss and disorganization linked to the syndrome. One classmate noted that her grades had fallen, which was unexpected for someone who had always been a dedicated student. When asked about the cause, Antonia said that it to her poor health. Her terrible secret somehow got revealed to an ex-boyfriend, Rodrigo, but the details he received were distorted and negative. He quickly reported this to others. Antonia insisted she was not responsible for what had happened, claiming the information he had was greatly exaggerated, but he did not believe her. To make matters worse, the day before indents, Martin had called her, and it's unclear what they discussed, though it might have included threats from him. On the evening of October 13, 2019, Antonia family could never have imagined how the day would end. Carla, visiting their parents' home, went upstairs to greet her sister Antonia, expecting a simple conversation. However, when she found Antonia seemingly asleep, Carla decided not to disturb her and moved toward the door. Just before leaving, she heard Antonia ask about their mother and request the light to be turned off. After telling Carla she loved her, Antonia turned her face away. Carla thought maybe Antonia just tired or not in the mood. But she didn't know that Antonia was suffering from painful thoughts, making her feel that there was only one way to escape her suffering. By 7 p.m. that evening, Antonia's mother, Marcela, noticed there was no response coming from Antonia's room. When Marcela went in, she was met with a horrifying sight. Her daughter was hanging motionless above the floor. Marcela rushed to Antonia but found no signs of life. Stunned by the tragedy, she called for help from neighbors. Family friends assisted in taking down the body and contacted emergency services. Soon after, Antonia's father, Alejandro, spoke to the media, promising to discover the reasons behind his daughter's tragic choice and to pursue justice. Antonia was known for her lively personality and intelligence, indicating that something significant had deeply affected her. The autopsy later confirmed that she had died from self-strangulation. The situation required urgent action. Without waiting for official investigations, Antonia's parents took matters into their own hands and started their own inquiry. They hired private detectives who carefully reconstructed the last days of Antonia's life and discovered the person responsible for her distress. Alejandro and Marcela quickly reported Martin Pradenas to the police, suspect him of being the culprit. Law enforcement officials interviewed Martin multiple times, but he maintained that he did nothing wrong concerning Antonia. He asserted that their relationship was consensual and he denied any involvement in her tragic death. However, detectives had a different viewpoint and gathered evidence that contradicted his statements. The investigation revealed that Martin left Pucón on September 17 around noon with friends, and they intended to return the following day. Once they arrived at their destination, the group hosted a party at a rented house, filled with conversation, laughter, and, of course, alcohol. A few hours before Antonia passed away, she sent a goodbye message to Rodrigo and shared a childhood video in a family chat. In the video, Antonia was dancing and laughing happily, which highlighted how much she longed for her younger self. She realized she could never go back to her previous life. This tragedy has deeply affected everyone. Thanks to Alejandro, who found the courage to share his daughter's story on a national level, Antonia's tragedy began to resonate with the public. Her name appeared on posters, social media hashtags, and even on building walls. Public support has had a big impact. Within a week, several women came forward with similar allegations against Martin. 6 new charges were filed against him, detailing actions he took from 2010 to 2019. Ultimately, Martin was arrested for these crimes. Meanwhile, his family sought to protect their personal information, which had been leaked online. They claimed that their constitutional right to privacy was violated due to numerous insults, aggressive messages, and false information circulating online. The Martin family suspected the Antonia family of being involved in these leaks. On June 12, 2020, the Temuco court granted the Martin family's request, according to which, the Antonia family is not allowed to share any information about the Martin family on social media and to refrain from making damaging posts. The ruling has angered Chileans who feel it unfairly protected Martin. On July 21st, the Antonia family appealed the decision to the Supreme Court, but their appeal was denied. Later that month, the lawyer for Martin filed a request for protective measures for his client. During the same period, he was formally charged with multiple attacks. Public anger in Chile intensified, leading to the investigation being referred to as the Antonia case. This case has come to represent the fight for justice for victims of violence. Many women, having stayed silent for years, started to share their own experiences. On July 22nd, the court decided to change Martin's preventive measure. He was transferred from detention to house arrest, that is, released from custody. The judge clarified that this decision did not reflect the final punishment. Although the prosecutor charged Martin with 5 counts of misconduct, the court only recognized 2 of them. This decision sparked massive protests across the country, with thousands of people taking to the streets in outrage over the halt of investigations into certain matters and the decision to place Martin under house arrest. In response to public outcry, the authorities filed a request with the appeals court. The judiciary acted quickly, revoking the house arrest and rearresting Martin. Later, the same court removed the statute of limitations for 2 cases of intimate violence. Meanwhile, Alejandro, along with feminist organizations, was working on a bill to establish penalties for such crimes. He stressed that everyone should be concerned when a woman is taken away by a man without resistance, particularly if she is intoxicated. He highlighted the necessity of taking action in these situations, as this vulnerability puts women at risk of becoming victims. The investigation progressed, and in February 2021, Martin's phone was found. Forensic analysis revealed that it contained photos of women's underwear, indicating that he took pride in his actions and kept records of them. The police report was extensive, totaling nearly 400 pages, and included statements from victims, witnesses, and people who knew both Martin and Antonia, including childhood acquaintances. Martin's former teacher described him as a bright and cheerful child, although he showed a strong interest in intimate subjects. Some women recalled that he had touched them when they were young, but at the time, no one considered it significant since they were all children. On June 14, 2022, the criminal court in Temuco began hearings that were expected to last over a month. During this time, the prosecution presented evidence, expert testimonies, and witness statements. Video footage clearly showed that Antonia could not control the situation. On August 26, Martin was sentenced to 20 years in prison for crimes related to intimacy and aggressive behavior. However, on December 29, the Supreme Court accepted the defense's appeal, disagreeing with the original verdict, and a new trial was set for spring 2023. On March 16, the defendant's legal team withdrew from case, and public defense took over his case. On April 24, 2024, his second trial began, addressing 5 cases of violence and 2 cases of sexual assault. During the trial, Martin chose to speak and described what happened. He attributed his actions to the severe effects of alcohol. However, prosecutors argued that his drinking with the women made them vulnerable. On July 7, 2023, he was found guilty. The federal prosecution requested a 41-year prison sentence for Martin Pradines. On July 28, 2023, the 31-year-old was sentenced to 17 years in prison for 7 offenses related to sexual intimacy involving 6 victims. After accounting for the time he had already spent in custody, he would serve 14 years. The tragic case of Antonia highlighted the danger posed by Martin. It remains unclear how many other innocent women may have been affected by his actions. The line between harassment and flirting is very thin, and one can never anticipate when someone might cross that dangerous boundary. Welcome back, mystery lovers. Today's case is going to keep you on the edge of your seat. The case of Regina Krieger. Regina Krieger was born on March 3, 1980, to parents Rondo Freeman and Dan Krieger. She was a cheerful girl, had many friends, and a younger brother named Clifton. Regina enjoyed music and water skiing, which led her to join the youth ski club at Lake Myrtle. In addition, she is also a religious person and participating in the youth group at the Lutheran Church. However, as she entered her teenage years, she began to experience unpleasant changes in her life. In June 1994, Regina's parents divorced, and she struggled to cope with their separation. The division of their property created further tension, as they could not come to an agreement. In September of that year, Regina expressed her desire to live with her father, Dan. Though initially her mother opposed this decision, she chose not to make the situation worse and ultimately agreed to let Regina stay with Dan. From December 1994 onwards, Regina lived with her father in a relatively stable environment. However, soon after, she began to exhibit changes in her behavior and lifestyle. In January 1995, Regina, a ninth-grade student at Burley High School, started associating with a bad group of peers. Her parents noticed that something was off but found it difficult to get her to talk about it. Their relationship deteriorated, leading Regina to eventually cut ties with this bad company. During this period, she received support from a psychologist who was assisting her in coping with the difficulties related to her parents' divorce. They built a trusting relationship, which became a valuable source of support for her. She confided in the psychologist about her intention to drop out of school due to her poor academic performance and frequent absences. This decision was prompted by a warning letter from the school stating that she would be expelled if her absences continued. However, Regina later chose to focus on her studies and stay in school. On February 27, 1995, she expressed her desire to quit school and start working. The psychologist advocated for her with the school teacher, explaining that she was going through a difficult period. As a result, the teachers allowed her to attend certain classes where exams were held, enabling her to earn the necessary credits and avoid being held back a year. Regina seized this opportunity and planned to continue her education. On the same day, Regina returned home after a tough day at school. She lived with her father and younger brother on the second floor, while Regina's bedroom was in the basement. That evening, the family came together to have dinner, discuss important topics like school, and then they went to bed. Around 11 p.m., that was the last time anyone saw Regina alive. The next morning, February 28, 1995, Regina's younger brother Clifton called out to her since everyone else had already woken up, but she did not respond and seemed to be missing. Then, Clifton went downstairs to Regina's bedroom and discovered blood stains. But she was missing. He quickly reported this to their father, Dan, who came down and confirmed that his son was telling the truth. The bedroom was empty, and there were indeed suspicious blood stains. Dan then called emergency services 911 and reached out to his daughter's relatives and friends, hoping that she had run away to stay with someone. Unfortunately, his hopes were dashed when Regina's close friends denied that they had seen her. The police arrived quickly at the scene, but their investigation was not thorough. They only collected a blood-stained blanket and a martial arts training sword, without examining the area properly. The officers reported no signs of forced entry, which led them to believe that Regina had left home on her own and may have staged an attack. However, Dan rejected this idea, asking why Regina would go to the trouble of faking an attack and leaving behind blood stains. This explanation did not align with his perception of his daughter. Investigators took Dan's concerns seriously, launched an investigation. At that time, there were no advanced methods for analyzing human DNA, and tools like CCTV cameras were not commonly used. This hindered the detectives' ability to gather and assess evidence, which was already scarce. Initially, the focus was on the main suspects, the father and younger brother of Regina, Dan and Clifton. Both underwent polygraph tests and passed without any issues. Despite their cooperation, the father remained a suspect because the police had no other leads to follow. The father and brother stated they were asleep and did not notice anything unusual that night. Regina is presumed missing. There was enough blood in her room to suggest she had suffered a serious injury or had fought back, but not enough to conclude she was dead. It was thought that she might have escaped by hiding from an attacker or could have been kidnapped by someone she knew, as it was assumed she opened the door for the intruder. Otherwise, it would be hard to explain how the criminal entered her room without breaking down the door or windows. A crucial source of information for detectives was Regina's diary, which detailed her life experiences. The entries contained stories about her parents' divorce and the sadness it caused her. Additionally, the police found out that she had a boyfriend named Isidra, whom she had been secretive about with her family. He was identified as a Latino teenager living in Twin Falls and had grandparents in Burley, which is near the Regina family's home. Isidra was said to drive a green pickup truck. The police thoroughly examined these details and started looking for Isidra in hopes of gathering more information about Regina. However, they were unable to locate the truck, his parents, other relatives, or Isidra himself. It was speculated that Regina might have invented the boyfriend as a way to cope with the emotional struggles stemming from her parents' divorce. The Regina family was feeling hopeless and unsure of how to proceed in their search for their missing daughter. They clung to the hope of finding her alive, continuing to seek information and new witnesses. They printed about 30,000 flyers to distribute and post throughout the area. On April 15, 1995, a woman's body was discovered in the Snake River, showing severe signs of decomposition. It was located 15 kilometers from the home of Regina. Forensic experts confirmed that the body belonged to a young girl under 20 years old. By April 17, dental records were used to identify her as Regina Krieger. Tragically, it was determined that she had suffered multiple stab wounds, including a deep throat cut, leading to a violent and painful death. The case was updated from a missing person report to a premeditated murder investigation. News spread quickly throughout the small town, creating fear among the residents, who became more cautious. The thought of a possible serial killer targeting young girls heightened their anxiety, causing people to hesitate leaving their homes and to secure their doors with multiple locks. This was especially worrisome for Regina's father, who was anxious about the safety of his 13-year-old son, Clifton. Despite the community's heightened concern, the investigation made little progress, with the police receiving no valuable leads or tips. Eventually, detectives uncovered new information about the case. They discovered that Regina had associated with the wrong crowd and had met drug dealers, including a man named Gilberto Rodriguez. Authorities believed Regina's murder could be linked to a drug-related debt. At the time, Gilberto was 32 years old, and he often traveled between Burley and Twin Falls to distribute drugs. He was known to be part of a local gang and was considered dangerous. Regina bought expensive substances, making it hard to determine how much she owed, possibly hundreds of dollars, which was too much for a 14-year-old to afford. However, there is no direct evidence that Gilberto was involved in Regina's murder. Later, police received calls from anonymous informants, they claiming the dealer was involved in the girl's murder. But the callers would hang up when asked for details, fearing being identified. No one wanted to get involved with criminals, so the tips lacked specifics, and there is still no evidence against Gilberto. Detectives viewed he as merely a participant in illegal drug activities. However, the communication between Gilberto and Regina, 14 years old, has caused more suspicion. Distributing drugs to such young individuals was a grave accusation. Still, law enforcement needed important evidence to press charges. Investigators continued to examine Regina's friends, eventually they focusing on one individual, Cody, a friend of Regina's. He also bought drugs from Gilberto. On the night of the murder, Cody and Regina were also with the dealer, Gilberto. When questioned, Cody claimed Regina had spent the entire night passed out in the bathtub. However, his testimony was confusing. He appeared very anxious and changed his story multiple times, suggesting he was scared and possibly hiding something. Because of this, the police were doubtful about his statements. As a result, Gilberto continued to be the primary suspect in the case. In 1996, police were actively searching for Gilberto, who had previously been arrested multiple times in 1991 and 1993. Investigators believed he was involved in drug distribution, but they lacked sufficient evidence to charge him and secure a conviction. To catch him, the police devised a plan to set a trap. They arrested a man named Joe, who had previously bought drugs from Gilberto, and offered to overlook some of his past offenses if he would make another purchase from Gilberto. Joe agreed and bought $1,500 worth of drugs, leading to Gilberto's arrest on November 18, 1996. However, the difficulties are just beginning, as he is a cunning drug dealer who does not want to go to jail and intends to fight for his freedom. Rumors circulated about his involvement in serious crimes, including the deaths of Blake Morgan Jr. and Regina Krieger. These cases shared similar characteristics. The young man Blake was killed in his own home while he was sleeping, as attackers entered from the street. Unlike Regina, he was not kidnapped from his home. During the investigation on April 10, 1996, the police identified the criminals involved. They discovered that the deceased, Blake, was associated with pal Cody, a client and associate of Gilberto. The second attacker was Jesus, Blake's half-brother. For Jesus, Gilberto is the ideal role model. He respects Gilberto very much and is always willing to do anything Gilberto asks, completely obeying Gilberto's wishes. As it turns out, the motive for the attack on Blake was unrelated to drugs, as Blake did not use them. Instead, it stemmed from an incident involving Angeli, a girl who was dating a Gilberto at the time. She claimed that Blake had insulted and hit her, prompting Gilberto to seek revenge. This led Jesus to point a 9mm pistol at Blake's head on April 9, 1996, just 2 weeks before Regina's death. The night before, Blake had a chance encounter with a group of troublemakers in a bar. Gilberto immediately informed Jesus that he wanted him to kill Blake, whom he considered an enemy for mistreating Angeli. The criminals, Gilberto and Jesus, planned their attack carefully to avoid detection, choosing not to strike in front of witnesses. Instead, they attempted to break into Blake's house around 2:30 a.m. but left when they found no one inside. This took place the night after their meeting in the bar. They returned around 3:30 a.m. and found Blake asleep. Jesus kicked in the door and murdered Blake by shooting him in the head. It is clear that Gilberto orchestrated these violent crimes, but he remained in the background to avoid being linked to them. Later, all two criminals, includes Gilberto and Jesus, were arrested and charged with first-degree murder for Blake's death. However, at that time, they were not considered suspects in the Regina Krieger case. Detectives did not even attempt to compare this crime to Regina's for a reason that is completely incomprehensible. They ignored the testimony of anonymous witnesses who had contacted police by phone earlier. They also have denied rumors that the two cases are connected. Gilberto, the dangerous dealer, remained in prison while awaiting sentencing. During this time, the Iowa State Department of Control of Controlled Substances was attempting to discover the identities of informants. In prison, there were rumors that Gilberto had already killed 2 informants and planned to eliminate the others. On June 26, 1997, Gilberto was sentenced to 30 years in prison, but he was released after serving just 10 years. For reasons that remain unclear, the police decided to suspend the investigation into Regina's case. For many years, the files containing evidence and testimonies sat untouched in an archive locker. New developments in the investigation were made possible by Gilberto's accomplice, Thompson. Thompson kept his secret for a long time, but it was eventually revealed, allowing the police to find Regina's killer and close this brutal murder case. In 2013, a new investigator took on the case and began by reviewing all the evidence collected by earlier detectives. While examining the crime scene photographs, he noticed a bloody trail that clearly indicated Regina had been dragged up the stairs and taken out to the backyard. It was puzzling how the previous detectives had overlooked this detail. The investigator thoroughly questioned all the witnesses, paying special attention to Thompson, who was serving a life sentence in prison. Thompson, now 31, he had been incarcerated since his teenage years and had a criminal record that included serious offenses like rape, burglary, and escape. He had even attacked the prison warden and killed a fellow inmate. The detective believed without a doubt that these criminals were responsible for Regina's murder, but they remained tight-lipped. Next, investigators reached out to one of Thompson's former cellmates, a long-term inmate who had entered prison in 2009. With nothing to lose, he agreed to cooperate with the police. His information allowed them to reconstruct the incident of the tragic night when Regina, a 14-year-old girl, was brutally killed. On the evening of February 27, 1995, Regina went to bed after 11 p.m., while her family slept, unaware of the impending horror. At that same time, Gilberto and Thompson were aimlessly driving around the neighborhood. When Gilberto remembered he had some unfinished business, he parked their car in the alley next to Regina's house to stop near her home. Thompson waited in the car while Gilberto made his way through the bushes and jumped over a fence. Gilberto entered a house through the back door, and Thompson kept watch from the vehicle. After a while, Gilberto returned and called Thompson to get out of the car. He explained that things had gone horribly wrong and that he needed help. He then went back into the house and emerged carrying a heavy object wrapped in a bloody blanket, which appeared to be a human body. Thompson assisted in loading the girl's body into the trunk, but couldn't get any details from Gilberto about what had happened. The two criminals, Gilberto and Thompson, left, but Gilberto buried the knife he used for the murder nearby. Later, Gilberto and Thompson attended a party where Gilberto casually walked around in a blood-stained t-shirt. Someone at the party might have called the police because of their suspicious behavior. After the party, Gilberto and Thompson went to a friend's house, where they changed clothes and cleaned off the blood. They then drove about 15 kilometers to a bridge over the Snake River. At the bridge, Thompson started to panic, and Gilberto pointed a gun at him, forcing him to throw the body into the river from the bridge. Thompson, scared, obeyed. Thompson returned home and locked himself in his room. He screamed in his sleep and acted very nervously. This made his family feel insecure. He was terrified of Gilberto, who had threatened him, and didn't want to reveal that he had thrown someone off the bridge. He tried to dismiss the incident as a bad dream. Later, at school, Thompson realized that Regina had gone missing from her home and everyone was searching for her. This realization made him panic because he knew he could be considered an accomplice, so he chose to stay silent. He was afraid not only for himself but also for his family, as Gilberto had threatened them too. Eventually, detectives spoke with Thompson, and he confirmed the information his cellmate had shared. Because he cooperated with the police, he was not charged in the Regina Krieger case. However, by that time, he was already serving a life sentence with no possibility of parole. On February 20, 2019, Gilberto Rodriguez, a dealer who had been evading authorities, was arrested for the murder of Regina Krieger. Despite the charges, he maintained his innocence. Following his arrest, new witnesses emerged, stating they saw Gilberto at a party on the night of the murder. Some witnesses reported he was wearing bloodied clothes but had no injuries. Others claimed to have seen him burying a knife nearby. Several anonymous individuals also stepped forward, having previously provided tips to the police. In October 2021, 58-year-old Gilberto Rodriguez was found guilty of first-degree murder in the case of Regina Krieger. He received a life sentence without the possibility of parole. It took 26 years to achieve this verdict, which brought relief not only to Regina's family but also to the entire community. Many felt safer knowing that this dangerous criminal would remain behind bars indefinitely. Hi everyone, thanks for returning. Let's unravel another perplexing mystery. The case of Yoselin Ortega. Yoselin Ortega was born in 1962 in the Dominican Republic as the youngest of 8 siblings. Her family was relatively wealthy, and her parents owned a wine cellar. She did not encounter any difficulties until her teens, when a sister of hers suddenly died from a brain aneurysm. This thing deeply affected her. She did not leave the house for about a year and suffered from depression, missing her sister. During this time, she began hearing voices urging her to harm others, but she confided only in a few sisters, asking them to keep it secret. For many years, almost no one knew about this, not even her parents, who noticed some odd behavior but attributed it to grief and depression over her sister's death. Yoselin continued with her life, resisting the voices and not harming anyone. After finishing school, she attended university to study accounting. Despite her struggles, but she graduated in 1985. She then decided to move to New York, where one of her sisters lived. After that, she and her sister started living together, working together to cover expenses. Eventually, Yoselin met a man and started a relationship with him, marrying in 1995. The following year, they had a son named Jesus. However, after their child was born, the relationship between the couple became worse even though they tried to save it. In 1999, Yoselin and her husband are divorced, leaving her alone with a young child in New York, where the cost of living is very high. Faced with a lot of financial difficulties, so she decided to send her 4-year-old son, Jesus, for grandparents to take care of. Then she returned to the United States, where she can earn more money for herself and her child. Yoselin lived with her sister, and they supported each other by working together in a factory and taking part-time cleaning jobs. She kept in regular contact with her parents and son, calling them almost every day. In 2004, Yoselin became a U.S. citizen. After saving enough money, Yoselin returned to her homeland in March 2008 to raise her son. Things were going well until April 2008, when her best friend Celine tragically ended her life on a balcony. This news plunged Yoselin into depression, making her extremely paranoid. She did not leave the house and forbade her son to go to school. Whenever she heard noises outside, like a dog barking, she will hide under the bed and force her son to hide with her. As time passed, the situation improved. Yoselin regained her composure, and her fears and worries faded away. She returned to work in the USA with her sister, leaving her son with her parents. Eventually, she met the affluent Krim family, who were looking for a nanny for their children. Kevin Krim, the head of the family, was a Harvard graduate, and his wife, Marina, graduated from the University of Southern California. They met at an Italian restaurant through friends and immediately hit it off. They got married in 2003. Marina and Kevin's first daughter, Lucia, was born in 2006, followed by their second daughter, Nessie, in 2009. When Marina was pregnant with her third child, the family relocated from California to New York due to Kevin's job. He was offered the position of Chief Executive Officer at Symbian. Previously, he worked in senior roles at Bloomberg and Yahoo. The family settled in one of Manhattan's finest neighborhoods, Upper West Side. Marina stays at home to do housework and take care of the children, but she later started a blog to document their daily lives as a personal hobby. The second daughter, Nessie, had health issues that required Marina's full attention. As a result, Marina began to have difficulty doing housework and had no time to take her children to extra classes like dancing or swimming. Additionally, she was in the late stages of pregnancy, making it difficult for her to manage anything. Her husband, Kevin, was frequently away on business trips and couldn't assist her, so they decided to hire a nanny for help. Marina and Kevin began searching for a nanny. At the dance studio Marina attended with her children, they met Jocelyn's sister, Celia, housekeeper for another family. Celia introduced Jocelyn to them and sent her younger sister's resume. Impressed by Jocelyn's experience with children, they contacted Jocelyn's previous employer and received a positive recommendation. Then, they invited Jocelyn for an interview and immediately liked her. She was sociable, smiling, and friendly. They decided to hire her as a part-time nanny. She came to their home after lunch and helped with the children until the evening. However, the entire story about the resume was fabricated. Jocelyn has no experience with childcare, unlike her sister, Celia. However, she needed a good job, and when an opportunity arose to earn a decent salary of $500 a week, Celia helped her create a resume. Despite her lack of experience, but Jocelyn excelled in the job. She got along well with the children, and there were no issues for about 2 years. Unfortunately, the Krim family could not have anticipated the tragedy that followed. Jocelyn appeared to be a kind and trustworthy woman, and the Krims believed their children were completely safe with her. This gave Marina free time to teach at a drawing school, her hobby, and continue blogging. The nanny Jocelyn treated the family's children as if they were her own, often joking that she had not one son, but 4 children. The children loved her in return, giving her drawings and becoming attached to her. The youngest son of the Krim family, Leo, couldn't even fall asleep without her. Marina was very cautious. She rarely left Jocelyn alone with the children, she doing so only in cases of extreme necessity. Usually, Marina was always with the children, and Jocelyn just assisted. Even when Marina left the house, she asked her relatives to keep an eye on Jocelyn. According to Celia, Jocelyn was happy with her job as a nanny. She earned a good salary for part-time work and received gifts, including expensive ones. Krim family even bought her plane tickets to the Dominican Republic so she can visit loved ones. They became so close to Jocelyn that in February 2012, they all went on vacation together to the Dominican Republic. There, they met Jocelyn's family, spent a night at her family's house, enjoyed the wonderful vacation, and gave her family many gifts. Krim family also helped Jocelyn's grown-up son, Jesus, move to New York to be closer to his mother. They bought 17-year-old Jesus an iPad for school, let him stay with them, and paid him well just for walking their 2 dogs. Although he had graduated from school in his home country, but Jesus had to repeat the 11th grade in the US under a different American program at a regular school. When he wasn't accepted, Jocelyn had to arrange for him to attend a private school, which was expensive for her. She was very protective of her son and didn't let him go outside unless necessary. She made him hide under the bed during loud noises, as he did in childhood, and when he went to school, she would to follow him secretly to ensure nothing happened to him. In April 2012, Jocelyn faced difficulties when she was evicted from the Bronx apartment she shared with her son. She had invested heavily in the housing, but the landlord evicted them. She was forced to move back in with her 3 sisters and their families, totaling 6 more people. The living situation was overcrowded and cramped. Jocelyn asked the Krim family for a raise so she could afford separate housing. They agreed to pay her more if she also cleaned their house for 5 hours a week. She accepted, but for the first time in a long time, she again had financial difficulties because she had to raise her son and pay the rent alone. Despite a decent income, her expenses were still too high. This situation stressed Jocelyn to sell jewelry and cosmetics to neighbors for extra money. Initially, she was successful, but when she gave cosmetics to a friend to sell, the friend disappeared without paying her back. This left she with a significant debt, forcing her to take on more work. She started cooking rice and preparing chicken dishes to sell. The extra workload exhausted her. She complained to her loved ones, saying the Krim family should pay her to babysit, not to clean and do housework. She felt that their family was so rich, they should just give her a raise without additional duties, and she was angry with them. Marina knew that Jocelyn needed money and began introducing her to friends and acquaintances to work as a nanny. When new clients started reaching out, Jocelyn became upset with Marina. She felt that taking on more work would leave her with less time to spend with her son. Her frustration grew daily. During these months, she lost a lot of weight and appeared tired and worn out. Once a cheerful and happy woman, she became tired and disillusioned with life. She began to have hallucinations, had trouble sleeping. Celia noticed that she started praying frequently at home, reading religious magazines because she saw demons, and began visiting a psychologist. But she hid all this from the Krim family, fearing she might lose her good job. On October 25, 2012, Jocelyn arrived at the Krim family's house at 3 p.m. Marina met Jocelyn at the door, as she was leaving with Nessie for a swimming lesson. She instructed Jocelyn to pick up Lucia from school and take Lucia's to ballet. Then Jocelyn had to go home to put Leo to bed. In the end, they planned to meet at Lucia's ballet class and return home together. Jocelyn and Leo picked up Lucia from school as planned but did not take Lucia to ballet lessons. Instead, they went for a walk in the park, ate ice cream, and then returned home. That day, Jocelyn first spoke to the janitor of the apartment building where the Krim family lived. She asked if Marina had returned home, but the concierge said no. Then, she, Lucia and Leo took the elevator to the apartment and ran into a neighbor. Just half an hour later, a tragedy occurred. Around 5 p.m., Marina and Nessie went to Lucia's ballet class to pick up Lucia. Little girl was supposed to be there with Jocelyn. However, Marina found out that little girl did not come to class. Concerned, Marina rushed back to her Upper West Side apartment in New York. On the way, she tried calling Jocelyn, but Jocelyn didn't answer. Marina initially thought no one was home and that Jocelyn might be out with the children in the park. She went to the concierge to ask if he had seen Jocelyn and the children. The concierge told her that they had recently returned to the building and they may be in the apartment. Marina and Nessie went back to the apartment and began to search each room. When Marina entered the bathroom, she was met with a horrific sight. Her two children, Lucia and Leo, lay lifeless on the floor, covered in blood, and Jocelyn sitting next to them holding a bloody kitchen knife. Seeing Marina's reaction, Jocelyn stabbed herself in the throat twice. Marina got scared. She rushed out of the apartment with Nessie, screaming. The neighbors heard Marina's heart-wrenching screams, and the building security calmed her down before calling 911 and emergency services. When the New York Police Department officers arrived, they found a horrific scene in the Krim family's apartment. Two small children, Lucia and Leo, lay in the bathtub with knife wounds, Marina beside them, overcome with grief and horror. The nanny Jocelyn lay on the floor, bleeding and in critical condition. Doctors found Jocelyn, Lucia, and Leo still alive and rushed them to the hospital. Tragically, Lucia and Leo did not survive, they were pronounced dead on arrival. Lucia was 6 years old, and her brother Leo was 2 years old. The nanny, 50 years old Yoseline Ortega, survived. She was put into a coma and underwent surgery. She had cut her hands and neck with such force that she broke her cervical vertebrae. Marina was in shock and unable to provide any information to the police, so they gave her a sedative. Her husband, Kevin, who was returning from a business trip, received a frantic voicemail from Marina, but couldn't understand what she was saying. He only knew that something was wrong with the children. When he arrived at the airport, police met him and delivered the devastating news. He fainted and was given first aid before being taken to the hospital to be with Marina. They were overcome with grief and struggled to comprehend how their nanny, who had been caring for their children for 2 years and was considered a member of the family, could commit such a heinous act. A neighbor reported seeing Yoseline with Lucia and Leo in the elevator just 30 minutes before the tragedy. Lucia and Leo seemed happy and playful, while Yoseline appeared emotionless and detached. However, the neighbor didn't think much of it, as Yoseline had behaved similarly in the past. Other nannies in the area, who often helped each other, barely knew Yoseline, as Yoseline was very withdrawn and didn't communicate with anyone. They considered her strange. The autopsy revealed Lucia and Leo suffered a horrific death, with nearly beheaded bodies. Lucia suffered more than 30 stab wounds and cuts, indicating that little girl had fought fiercely for her life, leading to severe blood loss. Her younger brother, Leo, had 5 stab wounds to the neck, and his throat was cut from behind. There was no doubt Yoseline was responsible for the murder. Detectives began to investigate her background in detail. Yoseline was hospitalized for a week and she was saved. When she regained consciousness, she could only communicate through gestures. She only asked about her family, but she said nothing about the murdered children or the Krim family. Later, when Yoseline could speak, detectives interviewed her on November 3rd. She did not confess to the murder, but she expressed feelings of resentment towards Krim's family because they often reprimanded her. She refused to have a lawyer during the interrogation. She said she was in the bathroom at the time of the incident, and she denied responsibility for causing the injuries that led to the deaths of Lucia, 6, and Leo, 2. In addition, she said that the children's mother, Marina, knew why this happened. On November 13th, Yoseline Ortega was charged with the first-degree murder of the children, but she denied her guilt and hired a lawyer. As New York had abolished the death penalty, so she faced life imprisonment. Yoseline was given a psychiatric examination and psychiatrists found her to be sane and able to appear in court. During the proceedings, Yoseline declined a plea bargain from the prosecution, which offered her a 30-year sentence in exchange for a guilty plea, allowing her potential release at around 80 years of age. However, she chose not to explain the incident and motives behind the crime, opting instead to be represented by a lawyer. The lawyer argued that her actions were due to her mental illnesses. She broke down and lost control when she harmed Lucia and Leo. 2 psychiatrists for Yoseline testified that she heard voices, including satanic ones, telling her to harm herself and the children. They stated that she had experienced hallucinations since her teenage years in the Dominican Republic, but her condition had not been diagnosed or treated. Before she was arrested for murder, several family members and friends noted that Yoseline's behavior had changed in the weeks leading up to the crime. She said she saw demons and shadows of people haunting her, she frequently cried, and prayed for the demons to leave her alone. Shortly before the murders, she threw pots and pans at the pool and kitchen walls to drown out the voices in her head, and sometimes banged her head against the wall to drive the demons away. Yoseline's sisters blamed the Krim family for the tragedy, accusing them of exploiting she, not allowing her adequate rest, failing to notice signs of mental illness, and leaving her alone with the children. In court, a psychotherapist who had seen Jocelyn testified that he did not find any signs of mental disorder in her, only anxiety and mild depression due to concerns about her son. A recording of her conversation with a psychologist was played, confirming that she did not mention hearing voices or experiencing other symptoms of psychosis. The possibility of Jocelyn having a mental illness was dismissed. A psychiatrist, called by the prosecution, assumed she was angry and was faking psychosis. A relative of Jocelyn mentioned that she envied the Krim family because they could provide for their children in ways she could not, and she had to send her son to live with his grandparents when he was only 4 years old. The defense argued that tensions had arisen between Jocelyn and the Krim family. Besides taking care of the kids, she was also paid to clean their apartment and do odd jobs, which she was reluctant to do due to an allergy to cleaning products. She also disliked being asked by Marina to work for other families. On one occasion, Marina asks her to look after another family's child, while their nanny is on sick leave. She agreed, but the next day she refused to go to the other family. Marina confronted her about this near the school, in front of strangers, making she feel uncomfortable. Afterward, she sat in the park and cried. She believed that Marina intended to humiliate her in front of others. Tensions between the Krim and Jocelyn continued to rise. They were unhappy with her work in the weeks leading up to the murder and had warned her that if she did not improve her performance, she would have to find another job. In particular, Marina felt that she did not spend enough time interacting with the children and fed them unhealthy food. The day before the murder, Marina did not say goodbye to she, which made she very angry and upset. Jocelyn was upset with the Krim family due to a constant lack of money. She also disliked the frequently changing work schedule, which sometimes caused her to miss doctor's appointments. Prolonged dissatisfaction, along with mental disorder, made she increasingly angry, something she could not control. Without realizing what she was doing, she committed murder, her lawyer said. However, the prosecutor argued that the crime was carefully planned in advance. The day before the crime, Jocelyn returned home, took medicine for a headache, talked to her sister Celia, and asked her to care for Jesus as if little boy were her own son. Celia agreed without understanding what Jocelyn meant. On the day of the murders, Jocelyn ensured her son got to school safely and said goodbye to little boy before heading to work. She left Celia an envelope containing important personal documents such as her passport, driver's license, bank cards, insurance certificate, and some cash. She also attached a paper bag with family memorabilia, photographs, and her jewelry to her son's room door. The prosecutor believed this was her way of saying goodbye to her family, she knowing she wouldn't return. She also deliberately did not take Lucia to ballet lessons. The prosecution argued that Jesus' move to the United States triggered her, increased her anxiety, depression, and guilt, so her resentment toward the Krim family also increased. On April 18, 2018, the jury found Jocelyn Ortegas guilty of first-degree child murder. The jury describing her actions as pure evil and dismissing the defense's argument that she wasn't responsible due to mental illness. Although the judge acknowledged that her mental illness influenced her actions that day, he expressed regret that she nor had secured the psychiatric treatment she needed. However, he stressed that planning a crime on that day had been meticulous. Before the court handed down its verdict, Marina said that Jocelyn ended up destroying her own family. At this point, Marina broke into tears, and Jocelyn shamefully lowered her head. Despite the terrible tragedy, the Krim family remained strong. They went on to have 2 more children's sons named Felix and Nose. Kevin requested the judge impose the maximum penalty on Jocelyn to ensure she would never leave prison. He observed no remorse from her and believed she should just spend the rest of her life in prison. The prosecutor echoed Kevin's request, urging the judge to sentence her to life imprisonment without parole. He argued that Jocelyn not only brutally killed Lucia and Leo, and she didn't even regret her actions. She attempted to end her own life to escape responsibility for her actions, but her plan did not succeed. Jocelyn's lawyer requested leniency from the judge during sentencing. She argued that the jury reached this decision because they were influenced by Marina's emotional state, not based on an objective assessment of the evidence. Ultimately, the judge ruled in favor of the prosecution. On May 14, 2018, Jocelyn Ortega, aged 55, received the maximum sentence of life imprisonment without parole. However, she remained composed for most of the trial. The case was particularly difficult when it involved the children, which moved many to tears, but Jocelyn did not cry. When witnesses described the kindness of the Krim family towards her, she shook her head in disagreement. However, she began to cry when the verdict was announced. After the verdict, Jocelyn expressed her regret in Spanish, saying she very sorry about everything that happened and asked for forgiveness from God, Marina, and Kevin. During the trial, it was disclosed that the Krim family had been misled by false claims of Jocelyn's experience as a nanny. Welcome back, detectives. Let's dive into another horrible case. The case of Scarlett Keeling. Scarlett Keeling was born in July 1992 in Great Britain. Her mother, Fiona, has 9 children from 5 different men. However, none of the men among them care about the lives of Fiona and children. The family relied primarily on state benefits for support, and Fiona also worked part-time. The children were homeschooled and lived in a poor area of Devon, UK. They live in a small house and some trailers. Fiona's first child was a boy named Hallandale Moose, who was 19 years old. Next is Silas, 17 years old, and then Scarlett, 15 years old. These 3 children were from Richard Keeling, who was of Levitsa descent and worked in a construction company. When Fiona and Richard's relationship began, they lived near each other in Hartford, but they separated shortly after Scarlett's birth. 2 girls, Marilyn and Kitty, were born a little over a year apart. At the time of the tragedy, Marilyn was 13 years old and Kitty was 12. Their father, Chris Osborne, was a trader. However, Fiona and Chris' relationship quickly ended. After them, 2 more children were born, AK and K, who was 9 at the time of the tragedy. Their biological father was Paul, a market trader. He met Fiona while she was trading in London. At that time, she was selling army equipment. Her relationship with Paul was brief, but it was he who took her to the Devon area. Devon has more spacious properties, suitable for Fiona's large family. She hoped to create a better environment for her children. However, her relationship with Paul quickly began to deteriorate after the move. They had frequent disagreements and serious conflicts, yet they continued living together to avoid paying rent. Eventually, they were evicted, which marked the end of their relationship. During this time, Fiona met Adam Foster, a contractor who specialized in flooring. He was the father of her last 2 children, Trinity and Aurora. They were born a year apart. But Fiona and Adam's relationship didn't last long. The large family had to squeeze into a small apartment provided by the state. Fiona found herself alone and had to take care of 9 children by herself. Most of the time, she homeschooled them. However, sometimes they start attending public schools when their family circumstances become more favorable. During this period, the Keeling family was described as decent and polite, showing no signs that their mother mistreated them. As the teenagers grew up, their living conditions were challenging. Fiona did her best to provide for them, but raising 9 children on her own was nearly impossible. She also faced problems with alcohol and substance addiction, although she tried to protect her children from these harmful habits. Unfortunately, They lived in marginal areas where drug use was common, and this environment negatively influenced her children. Scarlett grows up and gradually becomes interested in the more rebellious aspects of life. Fiona was aware that Scarlett had smoked weed several times. Some of Scarlett's friends have mentioned that she has been attending parties with untrustworthy friends. She frequently smoked and drank alcohol. Her mother, Fiona, noted that she appeared older than her age. By 14, she had started dating boys. Upon discovering this, Fiona advised that she should buy birth control pills, as Fiona wanted to protect her children from potential troubles and early pregnancies. Scarlett was described by her relatives as an active and cheerful girl who was beautiful and drew a lot of attention. She had a passion for horses and swimming. She also dreamed of joining a group of artists to pursue creative work. In 2006, Fiona began a relationship with Rob Clark, a man who was wealthier than her previous partners. A year later, they started planning a trip to India with the children, specifically to the famous resort of Goa, which they had long wanted to visit. Rob had been to Goa many times and loved it. For Fiona, this trip will be very interesting, as she had never traveled outside the UK. The trip promised to be a significant experience for the entire family. However, she hesitated for a long time. She worried not only about the trip but also about the large amount of money that needs to be spent. Her eldest son chose to remain in Britain due to document issues. She didn't want to rely entirely on Rob, so she decided to contribute to the trip costs herself. She used her savings, sold some belongings, and also drew from her benefits. After much preparation, packing, and financial planning, the family was finally ready and very excited about their upcoming adventure. The trip started in November 2007. Rob, Fiona, and 8 children visited Anjuna in Goa. This was the first destination on their itinerary. Anjuna is a peaceful coastal town known for its beautiful beaches and rich hippie culture. The area also hosts large parties at numerous clubs, creating a relaxed atmosphere with plenty of entertainment options. At first, they enjoyed the warm weather, the ocean, and the laid-back lifestyle. However, by early February, they grew tired of the constant noise and parties in Anjuna and wanted to explore other regions of India. Everyone agreed to move on, except for Scarlett. During her time in Anjuna, she met Julio Lobo, a local guide, who organized excursions. Then, they quickly became a friend. She helped promote his activities by distributing flyers and accompanied him on trips as an assistant. She even considered staying behind to continue this work and enjoy her time on the beach, but Fiona disagreed with her decision. Nevertheless, Scarlett knew how to persuade Fiona that this would be a positive experience. She would learn to be independent, enjoy a break, and work to earn some money. Fiona then agreed to let her stay with her friend Julio. She promised to attend fewer parties and avoid going out alone at night. With this resolved, Fiona, Rob, and the 7 other children set off on a tour to different cities. In fact, India is often ranked as one of the most dangerous countries. Numerous crimes occur here, especially against women, making it very risky for a girl to be alone. In early February 2008, the Keeling family was faced with a tragic incident. In mid-February, their eldest son, 19 years old Hallandale, was hit by a car while crossing the street in the UK. He was taken to the hospital with serious injuries. Upon hearing the news, Fiona and the rest of the Keeling family began making plans to return home to support him. On February 17th, Scarlett met with her family and began packing. During this time, she had expressed a desire to attend a party for St. Lee's Day. Although her mother was against it, but she managed to persuade her to let her go. She told her mother she would return by midnight after saying goodbye to her friends. After her mother agreed, she left the house with Julio. her mother unaware that this would be the last time she would see her daughter and that the party would lead to a tragic outcome. Until that moment, Scarlett's life on the coast followed a typical daily routine. She distributed leaflets for Julio and sometimes acted as his guide. She also served food and worked part-time on the beach. In the evenings, the party scene began. The 15-year-old girl, Scarlett, having earned some money, went out to enjoy herself. She attended the party until midnight, then she went back to Julio's aunt's house, where he was living. She quickly adapted to this lively lifestyle. She seemed happy and didn't want to leave. However, her plans changed when she realized her older brother, Hallandale, needed help. She couldn't abandon him in his time of trouble, so she decided to return to her family. Despite this, she chose to enjoy one last night out. Julio, feeling tired and unwell, decided to stay home. But Scarlett went out with Julio's 16-year-old sister and their friend Ruby for one final party before their vacation ended. Scarlett admitted to having a romantic relationship with Julio. He had even bought her a motorcycle. This revelation surprised Ruby, especially since Scarlett had just turned 15 and Julio was 10 years older. They visited a local bar and then moved to several other places, drinking moderately at each one. After midnight, they planned to head home. Scarlett, however, intended to return to her family rather than stay at Ruby's house, as her family had already come back for her. They chatted a bit longer and say goodbye, promising to keep in touch after Scarlett returned to Great Britain. Scarlett also planned to visit the resort again in the future to see her friends. Unfortunately, this plan was never realized, as no one ever saw her alive again. Scarlett never returned home, and at that time, no one was looking for her. Her mother, Fiona, thought she would return to Julio in the morning. However, she was still missing the next day. On February 18, 2008, the morning after the party, passers-by discovered the half-naked body of a girl on the beach. They quickly notified the police, who identified the deceased as a 15-year-old girl. Fiona has been facing depression because of the health situation of her son, Hallandale. Overwhelmed with horror, Fiona regained her composure and rushed to the scene of the tragedy. During the initial investigation, police stated that the body was found floating in the water, leading them to conclude that the cause of death was accidental drowning. However, there were clear signs of violence and abuse on the body. Despite this evidence, law enforcement in India believed she had gotten drunk on the beach, fallen asleep, and drowned. Naturally, Fiona protested this conclusion and was determined to seek justice. Fiona spent weeks searching for answers to prompt an investigation and review of the case. She even took photographs of Scarlett's body at the morgue to record evidence, fearing that the incident would be covered up. The police insisted it was an accident and seemed more focused on minimizing the incident to avoid scaring off tourists and damaging the resort's reputation. Fiona believes that the numerous bruises and severe injuries on Scarlett's body indicate that she died as a result of violence. She was also certain that her daughter had been raped. However, the investigators explained the missing clothing by saying it had been washed away by the waves. The police attributed the bruises on Scarlett's head to her hitting rocks underwater. It seemed the authorities had not thoroughly looked for her belongings. After speaking with several witnesses and examining the area where Scarlett was found, Fiona surprisingly discovered evidence that the police had overlooked. Specifically, she found several pieces of Scarlett's clothing hidden in the bushes nearby on the beach. The second investigation, along with a toxicology test, took place a month after Scarlett's death. By the end of the year, analysis showed that her system contained alcohol and drugs. Furthermore, she had over 50 violent injuries, including cuts and bruises, indicating a violent cause of death. The amount of water found in her lungs was too low to conclude that she died by drowning. It seemed more likely that the water entered her lungs after death. possibly while attempts were made to dispose of her body. A detailed toxicology analysis of the blood revealed the presence of both mild and severe prohibited substances. This makes one wonder how these substances could have entered her body if, according to relatives, she only smoked. Interviews with witnesses helped investigators piece together the incident of that tragic night when Scarlett left her friend Ruby. They spoke to a witness named Mike. He was from London and was on holiday in Goa. He reported seeing Scarlett around 3 a.m. as she entered the bar. She was very drunk, walked unsteadily, and incoherent speech. She fell in front of the entrance, and others helped her get up. She quickly attracted the attention of several men, but the bar owner prevented anyone from approaching her. Later, she went to the back of the kitchen, and she spoke with two Indian men for about an hour. Mike believed she knew them, and he suspected that she was drinking and possibly using drugs during that time. Mike is aware that this beach is dangerous because of the high number of sexual assaults and the increase in gang activity. Although drug sales were illegal, drugs were readily available in many places. A witness reported seeing Scarlett leave the bar with a local man around 4:30 a.m. When Mike left the bar about half an hour later, he noticed the man pulling Scarlett into the bushes. Since she did not resist or scream, Mike assumed they were consenting to have sex, so he did not intervene and left the scene. Based on this information, the police arrested two employees of the bar, Samson de Souza and Solani Plato Carvalho, on March 2, 2008, on suspicion of murder. On June 5, the case was handed over to the Central Bureau of Investigation. Samson and Solani were charged with murder, rape, drug use, and cruelty to a minor. Additional charges for attempting to destroy evidence were later added. Unfortunately, the Indian justice system moved slowly, and the trial in Goa was not scheduled until March 2010. 2 years later. During this time, preparations for the trial continued, and law enforcement interviewed 72 witnesses. However, just days before the trial was set to begin, the case was unexpectedly suspended. Samson and Solani still maintain that they had nothing to do with Scarlett's death, and there is currently no direct evidence against them. All evidence has been destroyed. The prosecutor's office to continue contacting witnesses. By 2013, they had selected 30 individuals who could help clarify the timeline of incident from that tragic night. The most important witness in this case is Mike, who witnessed the violence against Scarlett, but he did not realize it was happening against her will. Unfortunately, in April 2012, he refused to return to testify in court. Later, he told the media that he was afraid to come back to the country where the crime occurred because he feared for his safety, he believing that local gangs were involved. There were rumors that Mike had been threatened, and the Indian authorities even opened a criminal case against him regarding what he witnessed that night. However, his testimony was deemed unreliable. Fiona was shocked by Mike's behavior and labeled him a coward. Fiona believed that he could have saved Scarlett when he saw her being dragged into the bushes or helped bring the perpetrators to justice. However, he chose not to do so. She was so heartbroken, she even tried to meet Mike in England and take a video as evidence in court, but her efforts were unsuccessful. The police appear to be obstructing the pursuit of justice. They are still looking for reasons to blame Scarlett for the death. For instance, they pointed to her diary entries where she expressed her desire to leave Anjuna and return home. The detectives interpreted this as a sign of depression, hinting that she is trying to stay away from life. This thing seemed aimed at closing the case, despite the fact that Scarlett had never shown any signs of mental health issues or intent to end her life. The hearings were delayed for 8 years, during which Fiona was constantly in the media spotlight. She had to address numerous rumors and gossip. On September 23, 2016, Samson and Solani were acquitted due to insufficient evidence. Fiona was present during the sentencing and was devastated by the court's decision. After years of waiting, Samson and Solony were found not guilty. Fiona accused the police of corruption and she planned to take the case to higher courts. She vowed to keep fighting for justice for her deceased daughter, Scarlett. Attorneys representing Samson and Solony argued that from the outset, the Central Bureau of Investigation lacked evidence. They maintained that Scarlett's death was either a voluntary end to her life or an accident. However, the medical evidence that showed she had 52 injuries, most of which she could not have inflicted on herself. The defense claimed that no one had given the girl illegal drugs, rather, she had taken them on her own. Fiona felt a deep sense of injustice. Fiona had to wait 4 years to retrieve Scarlett's body and give her a proper burial. Fiona hoped for a fair court ruling. It felt as though she had lost, and she returned to the UK unexpectedly. In February 2017, the court's decision was appealed. It was demonstrated that the judge failed to comply with the deadlines for hearings. As a result, both suspects, Samson and Solony, were once again under investigation. The prosecutor's office in Njuna began investigating the possibility that Samson and Solony deliberately administered drugs and alcohol to Scarlett in an attempt to rape her. During the hearing, a witness stated that at about 3 a.m., she saw Scarlett trying to get a ride, maybe to go home. However, none of the drivers stopped for her. She then went to a beach bar, where Samson and Solony had promised to give her a ride after their shift ended at 5 a.m. She decided to wait for them there. It is believed that Samson slipped some narcotic into her drink so that he could easily rape her. Further investigation revealed that Samson was involved in the illegal drug trade on the beach, which meant he was always carrying drugs. During the hearings, his defense lawyer denied that Samson had any involvement in the murder, arguing that it was an accident. The lawyer tried to undermine the prosecution's case, but by then, the police had gathered enough testimony and evidence to implicate Samson in the brutal killing of Scarlett. The defense attorney successfully demonstrated that Solony was not guilty. He had a lot of communication with Scarlett that evening, but he left on his scooter before she departed with Samson. Therefore, Solony's charges were dropped, leading to his acquittal. In contrast, Samson faced a more serious outcome. On July 19, 2019, the Supreme Court of Bonn convicted Samson de Souza on 5 charges, including premeditated murder, rape, inciting Scarlett, a teenager, to use hard drugs, and attempting to conceal evidence of murder. Finally, Fiona found justice after nearly 11 years of unremitting efforts. But the outcome was disappointing. Samson received a sentence of only 10 years in prison for his heinous crimes, which many felt was too lenient. Despite this, Fiona was relieved that her efforts were not in vain and that the criminal faced some punishment for his actions. After 11 years, Samson still maintains his innocence, despite the court's decision. Fiona not only sought justice for Scarlett's murder but also faced scrutiny from the courts and child protection services. There was even talk of removing her custody of all her children, labeling her as a neglectful mother. However, this is not the biggest problem for the family. Tragically, before Samson's final trial, Fiona's eldest son, Hallandale Keeling, died after taking a massive dose of morphine. Fiona explained that Hallandale was very close to his younger sister Scarlett and couldn't cope with her rape and murder. He had felt guilty for not traveling to India with his family and believed he could have protected Scarlett. Additionally, he was also very sad that his sister's killer had not been punished for such a long time. Scarlett's reputation was severely damaged because of Rob. He provided information that contradicted Fiona's account. He claimed that by the second month in Goa, Scarlett had spent all her money on drugs and alcohol, forcing him and her family to survive on just 1 bowl of rice a day. Rob alleged that she used drugs openly in front of her family and that Julio had attempted to forcibly take her just days after they arrived at another beach. He suggested that Fiona allowed this because she could receive money for Scarlett, implying that Fiona had abandoned her. Fiona, however, vigorously rejected these claims, insisting they were mere rumors. Hi everyone, thanks for returning. Let's unravel another horrible case. The case of Jacobson family. Neil Jacobson was born in 1961 to Harold Jacobs, a former Marine, and Goldie, a homemaker. He had two sisters, Deborah and Robin. Although the parents were strict, they also loved their children very much. Despite the outward calm, but Neil's parents faced some challenges. His mother struggled with lifelong depression, managed with medication and therapy. On the contrary, his father is a calm person and a reliable support for the family, but sometimes he cannot avoid moments of breakdown. Neil also faced mental health issues, likely inherited from his mother, and tried to meet the high standards set by his parents. His sisters, however, seemed unaffected by psychological issues. Neighbors saw family members treating each other with respect and love. Neil's first serious problems began after he was admitted to Montclair State University. He successfully completed his initial years, but each new stage became increasingly difficult. Additionally, he took a job to support himself. He tried his best to manage the workload from both his studies and his job, while also wanting to make his parents proud. However, at times, he couldn't handle it. As a result, just before earning his bachelor's degree, he suffered a breakdown and dropped out of school. Despite facing psychological difficulties and strictness from his parents, he still received support from his father. Yet, it was always very hard for him to accept that he couldn't live up to his parent example. Neil's relationships with women were often complicated and not smooth. However, when he was 29, he met Frankie at the gym. She was 33 at the time. He worked on Long Island, while Frankie worked on Wall Street. Their shared profession as stockbrokers brought them together. They both lived in the same residential complex in Queens, New York. Initially friends, they gradually began dating. Their mutual interests and activities drew them closer. They spent many weekends together over the years. Diving, cycling, and other sports. Their relationship was genuinely happy, as noted by all their friends. On New Year's Eve in 1989, they announced their engagement, and by the end of July 1991, they were married. They decided to start their own business. Neil opened a mortgage brokerage firm in 1993, and a few years later, Frankie left her job to join him in growing the company. Their business prospered, and by 2002, they were able to purchase a luxury home. Not everything went smoothly for them. They always wanted children, but Frankie couldn't get pregnant. She was undergoing infertility treatment for a long time, and finally, a miracle happened. She became pregnant and gave birth to twins, Eric and Joshua, in 2003. The two boys are a great couple and support each other well. Joshua had speech difficulties, but they did everything to support the boy. He attended specialized therapy that their wealth allowed them to afford. During this time, Neil grew tired of the weather in New Jersey, where their mansion was located. In addition, his father Harold's health was deteriorating, and it was difficult for him to visit them because of the distance. To be closer to his father, he decided to move to Florida. He bought 4 properties in the Palm Beach area, 3 condos, and a dream home worth about $1 million. He sees apartments as a good business opportunity to earn rental income. Neil started planning to move, but Frankie was not excited about it. She enjoyed their current home because her family, friends, and business were there, and their children were still young. She did not want to leave, which caused some disagreements between them. However, they managed to work through these difficulties. Neil didn't pressure she to move immediately. Instead, he gave her time to consider it. During a vacation, they visited their dream house, which was still unfurnished, so they slept on air mattresses and gradually got used to the place. Frankie eventually grew fond of it. A few years later, she was ready to move. By July 2007, they relocated to Florida with their children. The children got involved in sports and achieved their first successes. Besides taking care of the children and managing the household, Frankie was also creative and worked on writing a children's book. However, in 2008, their family began to face serious problems. At that time, the real estate market bubble burst, causing a financial crisis that affected many other sectors. The apartments did not generate the income Neil had anticipated, investments did not pay off, previous deals failed, and new purchases were unsuccessful. Consequently, Neil found himself unable to repay the loans he had taken out. Neil, once a successful businessman with over $2 million in capital, is now facing the same amount of debt, and he is struggling to overcome this financial difficulty. During this challenging time, Neil's father passed away, adding more pressure to the family. He had to sell assets for very low prices, yet still faced a substantial debt of $1 million. The ongoing crisis left them with almost no income, and they felt lost about what to do next. They were at risk of losing everything, and this situation seriously affected Neil's health. Then, doctors detected issues with Neil's thyroid gland, although tests only showed a slight hormone imbalance. The doctor chose not to address it immediately, hoping it would improve over time. However, his condition became much worse, particularly affecting his mental health. Shortly after Christmas 2009, he felt unwell, experiencing dizziness and weakness. On January 2, 2010, Frankie took him to the hospital, where doctors diagnosed him with depression and prescribed strong antidepressants, Zoloft and Cias. After a second doctor visit, he was also prescribed the sedative Oxynax, but his condition did not improve, leading him to see a psychiatrist. During his first meeting with the new doctor, Neil reported frequent panic attacks related to the real estate market collapse. Although he had no obvious symptoms that required previously prescribed medications, he did show signs of anxiety. Instead of reducing or changing his medication, the doctor increased the dosage, which led to further deterioration of his condition and the emergence of alarming symptoms. Frankie told her sister, Neela, that Neil experienced periodic hallucinations and had trouble sleeping. He often behaved inappropriately, seemed disoriented, and felt lost. He was convinced that FBI agents were monitoring him because of his debts. He believed that he and Frankie would be imprisoned and that their children would be placed in foster care. All of his relatives knew that he wasn't being watched, but they couldn't convince him otherwise. He was truly paranoid. Neil became withdrawn, staying awake at night waiting for Frankie to wake up, and spent his days following her around, constantly talking about his fears. He couldn't handle the gaze of strangers, so he almost completely stopped going outside, fearing he was being pursued by the FBI. One notable incident that showed Neil's paranoia happened when Frankie managed to get him to go to the gym. She believed that exercise could improve his overall health, including his mental health. However, even before getting on the exercise bike, Neil's heart rate skyrocketed to 200 beats per minute due to his anxiety. This heart rate was dangerously high for his age, so they had to stop the workout to avoid risking his health. Neil's condition was deteriorating, yet he continued taking high doses of medication. About 3 weeks before the incident, he went out alone to enjoy the fresh air. Without waiting for his family, he got into his car and drove off. Luckily, he didn't get far. After driving for a while, he crashed into a barrier at an intersection. Disoriented, he exited the car and began acting inappropriately. A passing driver noticed his odd behavior and called 911 to alert the police. Then, the night January 22, 2010, Neil hid a gun on the top shelf of his bedroom closet. It was a Smith & Wesson revolver, next to an open box of .38 Winchester cartridges and a letter he had opened 3 days earlier. 3 rifles were also concealed in nearby drawers. A birthday party for Neil's twin sons, Joshua and Eric, was planned for January 23. Family and friends would gather for the party, play laser tag and take souvenir photos. Unfortunately, the children never arrived at this party as they were soon tragically shot. Around 6 a.m. on January 23, 2010, while everyone was still asleep, a tragedy unfolded, just hours before the party. Neil woke up, retrieved a gun from the closet, and his wife Frankie heard the noise. Frankie was half awake, not understanding what was happening in the next room, so she called her husband, Neil, and asked him what he was doing. Neil emerged from the dressing room holding a gun and pointed it at Frankie's, 53 years old. He told her that it was over and there was no other way. Terrified, she pleaded with him not to do it, insisting that she wanted to live and asked about their children. Neil persistently told her that there was no other solution and that they all needed to go to another world. She couldn't believe what she was hearing. Realizing he was serious, she rushed at him, in an attempt to take the gun from him to protect herself and their children. A life and death struggle broke out between them, and they fell to the floor. Frankie fought with all her strength to take the gun and save herself and the children, but her efforts were in vain. Neil was stronger. He managed to wrest the gun from her grasp and shot her twice in the face, killing she instantly. During the struggle, she suffered several injuries, including a knocked-out front tooth and cuts on her fingers. Then, Neil reloaded the gun, put more bullets in his pocket, and went to the children's room at the other end of the house. First, Neil went to Eric's room, where his son was still sleeping soundly and didn't hear the gunshots. Neil, without hesitation, raised the gun and aimed it at his son's head. He shot Eric twice in the face, causing blood to splatter up to the ceiling and cover the surrounding walls. Although Eric did not die immediately, but the boy began to moan and choke on his own blood. Neil then pressed a pillow to his son's face and fired 2 more shots. At this time, the boy showed no signs of life, and Neil concluded it was over. He reloaded the weapon and went to Joshua's room. Like Eric, Joshua was still fast asleep and did not hear a thing. Neil placed a pillow on Joshua's right cheek and shot him twice in the face. The boy didn't react. Neil checked to ensure the boy was dead, then he leaving the room. He returned to the bedroom, past Frankie's body, and went into the bathroom to wash the blood off his face and hands. Afterward, he took his car keys and attempted to rouse his deceased family members, telling each of them to come on quickly and adding that if they didn't get up, he would have to leave without them. Of course, none of them responded. The ambulance arrived at the scene. Neil was covered in blood, but only suffered minor injuries from the accident that occurred earlier. The officers attempted to speak with he. During a brief and unclear conversation, he repeatedly tried to find his gun and acted suspiciously. The police confiscated the gun and continued questioning him. During the conversation, he confessed to killing his family. He was detained until the incident could be clarified. The detectives quickly began their investigation. They went to the Jacobson family home in Wellington, Florida, near Palm Beach, to verify his statement, where they discovered a horrific scene: 3 bodies inside the house. The crime scene was undisturbed, with bodies in various locations throughout the home. There was a lot of blood, and all 3 family members were dead. Forensic experts started examining the house, while detectives interrogated Neil at the local police station, allowing them to piece together the incident of that terrible morning. During his conversations with detectives, Neil frequently referred to his suicide note. In this 5-page typewritten letter, he detailed the reasons for his planned murder: and end his life. He wrote that he could no longer live like this. Everything in their lives was spiraling out of control. He felt it was necessary to kill his entire family and himself to prevent them from suffering due to his poor business decisions. The letter also revealed that he intended to visit his mother and kill her. This was confirmed when police searched his car and found the keys to his mother's house, which he had brought with him. He was heading towards her house when the accident occurred. The police thought Neil didn't mean to end his life. Instead, he lost control after taking medication and crashed. However, his mother disagreed, she believing he wasn't a threat. She blamed the bloody incident on January 23 on incorrect prescriptions from doctors, saying the medication was too strong and caused Neil to lose control of his actions. During questioning, Neil said on January 23, 2010, while his family was celebrating their children's birthdays, a special force arrested him. However, the two children Joshua and Eric did not survive to see their birthday party. This horrific case has shocked the entire town of Wellington. Many people close to the family and neighbors could not believe that Neil, a respected businessman, could do such a thing to his family. The defense argued that the murder was committed due to insanity, so Neil was sent for a psychiatric evaluation. While in prison, he met with psychiatrists multiple times. His mental state was very unstable. Sometimes he showed no emotions and seemed detached from reality, while other times he lost control and became hysterical, especially when he remembered his actions. In prison, doctors diagnosed him with deep depression and prescribed different medications. Initially, he seemed to improve, and his condition stabilized. However, after a few weeks, the psychiatrist stopped the treatment because his body reacted poorly to the medication. However, a subsequent examination revealed that, due to a medical error, Neil did not receive treatment for his main illness, hypothyroidism, related to the thyroid gland and hormonal balance. In this context, apathy, depression, and anxiety are very likely. It was determined that he was prescribed powerful psychotropic drugs without official justification. Not even a complete psychiatric examination was conducted. Furthermore, it was found that the doses of the prescribed medications he took could indeed cause the hallucinations and disorders that he experienced. Neil deeply loved his family. He and his wife were not only married but also best friends. He never did anything wrong with his wife and children and was devoted to them. However, he was severely impacted by the financial crisis, leg problems, and his father's death, and his treatment was ineffective. Neil claimed that he wasn't the one who harmed his family. During the 3 weeks he was on medication, he changed significantly, sleeping only 2 hours a day. One day, the medication had a severe effect on Neil's, making his brain feel like it was burning. That morning, he woke up hearing voices in his head commanding him. Initially, he resisted, but the voices became louder and more persistent. He genuinely believed that killing his entire family was the only way to protect them from the FBI. Prosecutors are asking for the sentence of death, under Florida law. However, many of Neil's relatives, including his lawyer, opposed such a severe punishment. They supported Neil, noting that before the tragic incident, he had never been cruel. Although he appeared worried and stressed about financial matters, but his family did not believe he was capable of such a violent act. The defense argued that a medical error led to the wrong treatment, and they demanded that the doctors be held accountable for the tragedy. The Palm Beach prosecutor mentioned that 2 copies of a suicide note had been discovered in the Jacobson family home. The note expressed love for the family and expressed feeling overwhelmed by their current circumstances. It stated that due to his short-sightedness, he had placed the family in a position of losing everything they had built. He admitted to participating in the real estate investment craze and felt confused about his actions. The note conveyed his desire not to leave his family in poverty and his inability to let them live in such conditions. He admitted that anxiety was consuming him and expressed shame. The first note was dated January 20th, and the second January 23rd, the same day as the triple homicide. This is considered evidence to classify the murder as premeditated, showing that he had planned his actions. Despite acting impulsively, but he admitted to having brought weapons home in advance and hiding them in the dressing room. Frankie was unaware of the presence of a pistol in the house and had no knowledge of the tragic incident that were to occur that morning. Neil had a clear memory of all the incident and was able to describe them in detail. A few days before the incident, Neil's mother visited him. During her visit, Neil repeatedly hugged her and said her that he loved her no matter what happened. This behavior raised doubts about his mental state. Despite this, the Frankie family viewed Neil as a coward and cruel man for allowing evil to take control and lead to the death of his entire family. The defense argued that Neil's inappropriate behavior, such as waking up and immediately rushing to the weapon closet, suggested a mental disorder. They claimed he was influenced by voices and experienced a breakdown due to medication. Friends and relatives confirmed these claims. Subsequently, an independent psychiatric examination diagnosed Neil with bipolar disorder type 2 and several other serious mental issues. These findings led to him being deemed insane at the time of the crime. Nonetheless, the lawyers believed the jury would not accept this insanity defense and advised Neil to negotiate a plea deal with the prosecution. To avoid the death penalty, Neil agreed to a deal. Consequently, in February 2012, he pleaded guilty to murdering 3 people. His death penalty was replaced with 3 life sentences without the possibility of parole. Initially, he was under special supervision by prison guards, which is common in cases with a high risk of end his life. Neil attempted to end his life 3 times, feeling he had nothing left to live for, but each time he was saved. As part of the plea bargain, his relatives are allowed to visit him twice a year. In prison, he works as a clerk in the library, helping prisoners choose books and find information. Fellow prisoners say that Neil cries every day in his cell when he is alone, regretting his actions. Before the verdict, he often stated that he was indifferent to the death penalty and even expected it as a form of release. For someone who was once a loving husband and father, living with this overwhelming guilt is unbearable. This year, his wife Frankie would have turned 78, and their children Eric and Joshua would have been 32. Instead, they will forever remain 53 and 7, buried together in one grave.